I'd like to ask Pat to open the meeting.
Kia ora, John. Kia ora whānau. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, e Māori ora ki te katoa. Haumi e hui e, tā eki e. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rauranga tirama, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai I tēnei huihuinga. Ko pātere ki tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Ngāti Maru ki Taranaki. He mema puari ahau mō te Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa. I tēnei pō, e kōrero hira ka puta mai, e pai ana ki te mahi, e kaupapa atu I te mate hoka I roto I Aotearoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā iwi au koutou katoa. Kia ora ana, talo whalawa, malo balawinaka, whakalofalahi atu. Warm Pacific greetings to all of our whānau from my beautiful humble bubble here in Pakuranga to wherever you're watching us from in the world. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm looking forward to learning. I'm looking forward to receiving new, fresh information on how to make our world a better place. I'm going to hand it back over to my colleague John and our amazing whānau, and I'm looking forward to our summit for 2021. Kia ora.
Thank you, Pat. I'd like to, at this stage, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Sela Hart. Sela Ngāti Kuia, Ngāti Tahu, Ngāti Tohonunu is CEO of Hapaiti Haora, Māori Public Health NGO. Sela is also on the board of Health Promotion Forum of New Zealand and Health Coalition Aotearoa. Sela has worked in the Māori health sector for over a decade and is dedicated to advocating for system and policy level changes that will address inequities that exist for Māori Pacific and other underserved communities. Sela is a resident of South Auckland, Mangere East, and has 5 tamariki. Welcome, Sela.
Tēnā koe, John, tēnā tātou katoa, tēnā koe Pat, nō rā I tō mai te kahu atawhai ki roka I te kaupapa nei o tira tātou katoa. Tēnā tātou I te computer, ko Sela Hart tōku ingoa, ki te tau tōku māma, ko Ngāti Kānunu ki Wairarapa Rawa ko Ngaitahu, ki te tau tōku pāpā, ko Ngāti Kuia, Ngāti Apa ki te rā tō rangitāne o Waire Rawa ko Ngaitahu hoki. So kia ora everyone, I have the honour and privilege, and I was voluntold by my lovely colleague Dr. Mātere Harwood to contribute my time this evening to being a part of this very important kaupapa. So thank you for having me. Kia ora tātou.
Sela, I'd ask you to introduce our first speaker, which is Professor David Simmons.
Absolutely, it's my honour to introduce our first speaker up this evening, Distinguished Professor David Simmons. He holds a number of credentials behind his name, which I won't list. However, is the Professor of Medicine at the Western Sydney University MacArthur Clinical School, Head of the Campbellton Hospital Endocrinology Department, and Director of the Diabetes, Obesity and Metabolism Translation Unit, DOMTUR. With over 370 refereed publications, he has won several national and international awards, including the American Diabetes Association 2020 Norbert Frenkel Award. He is a past president of the Australasian Diabetes and Pregnancy Society and was a member of the World Health Organizational Technical Working Group on the criteria for hypoglycemia in pregnancy. He was previously the chair of the Diabetes UK Health Professional Education Steering Group. He is a visiting academic for the University of Örebro, Sweden, professional fellow at the University of Melbourne, guest professor, first affiliated hospital, Zhengzhou University, and senior medical officer at the Middlemore Clinical Trials Unit, South Auckland. So we welcome you, Professor David Simmons. Kia ora.
Hello, everybody. Kia ora tātou, talofa lava, kia orana, whakalofalai atu, and maloelele. And it's a pleasure to be meeting up with you again at the Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa Annual Diabetes Summit. I'm really sorry that I'm not with you in person today in Auckland. I'm here in Sydney, and hopefully I'll get back to you in the future. I'm happy to be able to present on the Diabetes Care Support Service audit, its results, and some of the implications for people with diabetes, particularly in South Auckland. I've got no relevant disclosures. And just to remind you that the largest pandemic ever seen is the global diabetes epidemic, with 463 million people estimated in 2019. COVID-19 to the 7th of August is 212 million cases with 4.4 million deaths, and people from diabetes make up quite a big proportion of those people suffering due to COVID. And it's very sad to see that COVID is back in New Zealand, and we also have it here in New South Wales. The diabetes epidemic in South Auckland, we made some predictions in 1999 that by 2021, we'd go up to 150,000 people with diabetes. However, in fact, by 2018, that number was 253,000. So the numbers have been increasing at a much faster rate than we expected. And after we have got some control over the COVID-19 pandemic, we've still got to try to turn around this diabetes epidemic, especially in Counties Manukau. So what I'd like to talk about today is just reintroduce you to the Diabetes Care Support Service, an update on some of the diabetes complications work that we've done, and also some talk about diabetes management and what's been happening, and then some options to turn around the trajectory, because we do have some very good options which are affordable and appropriate and we now know work. So to remind you that the Diabetes Care Support Service was a quality improvement audit 1994 to 2018, which is relatively unchanged over 25 years. So we really have a unique data set to look at what was going on and look at some of the relationships. And last time presented a little bit about the mortality data. We've got more of that data now, and this is now published in the Lancet Global Health. And this was very influential with Pharmac in the funding now for the new SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonists. So in the audit, 80,000 approximately people with diabetes, 47,000 with type 2 diabetes over that time period. So a very large audit. And the first thing to have a look at here are the cardiovascular disease hospitalization rates per 1,000 person years during this time. They increased from really quite low rates before 1998 to over 250 per 1,000 person years in the last 5 years, 2014 to 2018. And you can see that there's no significant difference really between European, Maori and Pacific people in those rates, crude rates. If we then have a look at the end-stage kidney disease hospitalization, again, you can see this massive increase from almost none having a hospitalization that were recorded as such before 1998 to very high rates, particularly among Maori, 2014 to 2018. However, these rates belie the difference in age between Europeans with diabetes and Maori and Pacific people with diabetes in New Zealand. There's a 10-year age difference. So really the impact is so much more in the Maori and Pacific communities. So when you do adjust for age and gender and other factors, what we can see is that the all-cause mortality among Maori with type 2 diabetes is almost double that among Europeans. Pacific people, adjusting for obesity and so forth, comes down but remains higher as well. Cardiovascular hospitalization is really very much higher among Maori and Pacific people after adjusting, especially in these younger age groups between 40 and 70 years of age. And again, you can see in blue, again, Maori at the top, just underneath that in red Pacific, and then at the bottom, yellow Europeans. And you can see that the end-stage renal disease hospitalization is twofold among Maori and 1.59, 59% higher among Pacifica once adjusting. And this difference is greatest at around 50, 55, so still quite young. The difference is early on, under 40, we think is probably people with type 1 diabetes who have remained in the database due to coding issues. So why is there this greater risk of complications? And we're now starting to dig into the data set to have a look at possible relationships. And the first one is this really so important a property, this huge difference between Maori and Pacific people and Europeans. And here you can see a comparison between Maori and Europeans over the 25 years of the probability of ending up with chronic kidney disease. And in the top left, Maori versus Europeans of any chronic kidney disease, and you can see slightly higher rates among Maori. No real difference for developing stage 2 chronic kidney disease, a slight difference with stage 3. But look at these rates going to stage 4 and stage 5, the ones that go on to dialysis and certainly die very prematurely and potentially for transplant where that's available. And you can see these are substantial differences. So there's something going on increasing the progression to stage 4 and stage 5. And a similar mirror image is seen among Pacifica, where you can see that these progression rates to stage 4 and stage 5, the most severe forms of kidney disease, again, are much greater among Pacifica. So just to summarize those initial data, so South Auckland is a diabetes hotspot with substantial excess morbidity, mortality, and there's sorrow behind all of this, of course, due to the diabetes. The impact of the epidemic has been increasing hugely. Look at those hospitalization rates. Maori and Pacific people have higher mortality and hospitalization. Nephropathy, Maori and Pacific people is much greater progression to CKD 4 and 5 over time, roughly the same to CKD 2 and 3. So what we really need is something for diabetes prevention, if we can, and clearly early aggressive treatment once diagnosed, rather than waiting until later, when that later progression to CKD 4 and 5 perhaps has become irreversible. So in terms of trying to prevent that progression, what's been happening with diabetes management? So on the left, you can see what's been happening to systolic and diastolic blood pressure between the different ethnic groups over the audit period. And on the right is the same for HbA1c. At the bottom in black on the HbA1c, you can see Europeans. Maori remain in red and Pacific people in blue. And on this one, you can see people of Asian descent. And you can see blood pressure is roughly the same between the different ethnic groups. But look at this big difference, huge differences, particularly before 2000. And I'm pleased to say that those very high rates of very poor glucose control have improved. But we've ended up really for the last 15 years or so, where Maori and Pacific people are running in parallel with Europeans, and unfortunately 11 to 12 millimoles per mole higher. I won't go through this in detail, but we've looked at these differences between ethnic groups and what's really going on within the first 5 years after entry into the DCSS, which is particularly due to the initial diagnosis. We've adjusted for a whole range of the factors, age and gender, deprivation, time, and so forth. And if we look at this cohort now, that we've looked at these differences in HbA1c in particular, but the other metabolic measures as well, you can see that overall we've got 32,000 between European, Maori and Pacifica. And you can see the first thing is that Maori and Pacific people, they're more likely to have women with type 2 diabetes in the DCSS men versus Europeans. Europeans were least likely to be in the least deprived areas within South Auckland and West Auckland, and Pacifica were most likely to be in the most deprived. Maori were most likely to be smokers at 29.5%, lower rates within European and Pacifica, but not absent. Diabetes duration in this analysis is around 5 years on average. And you can see that the highest rates of treatment with antihypertensives are among Maori. The highest uptake of statins is among Maori as well. And the highest use of insulin was also among Maori at 30.5% versus around 27% in European and Pacifica. And here you can see the changes in the metabolic profiles within those first 5 years of entering the diabetes care support service. So you can see red among Pacifica, the systolic blood pressure was lowest, and then Maori in blue. And the worst systolic blood pressure over the first 5 years of entering into the DCSS is among Europeans, systolic blood pressure being a major determinant of cardiovascular disease and renal disease. Body mass index, after all of the adjustments, you can see that Maori were most likely to have a higher BMI. Very little difference, very little change over the first 5 years. And here's that HbA1c, an initial dip perhaps, and then not much change over those first 5 years, and very spread out with the worst glucose outcomes among HbA1c outcomes among Pacifica, and then Maori a little bit below that, and then the best glucose management in those of European descent. But look, no differences in total cholesterol, and Pacifica had lower triglyceride, but otherwise very similar between European and Maori. So how come there are these ethnic differences in outcomes when a major predictor of these adverse cardiovascular renal outcomes, systolic blood pressure, is worse in Europeans, but it's this glucose control that's so much worse among Maori and Pacific people? If we then look at the proportion attaining the targets, you can see how this translates. And it has deteriorated over the 5 years in all of the ethnic groups in terms of glucose control. But 49% of those of European descent have achieved the target of under 3 millimoles per mole set by the New Zealand Guidelines Group. But it's only 30 and 27% among Maori and Pacifica who've achieved those targets within those 5 years. So very low rates of achievement of those, in spite of those higher rates of, for example, of insulin treatment among Maori. Systolic blood pressure, 59% of Pacifica have achieved those targets, 46% of Maori, and only 41% of Europeans. Total cholesterol, there's no significant difference. Triglycerides, Maori are achieving, less likely to have achieved those targets. But that relates very much to glucose control as well. And one factor which may be associated with this is the process around access to specialist services. So this is data we showed last time, which is the use of the diabetes specialist services in Waitemata, Auckland and Counties Manukau. And you can see that only 6.5% of those with poor glucose control, about 75 millimoles per mole, only 6.5% went 2 or more times to the Counties Manukau District Health Board, much, much lower than those in Auckland and the Waitemata. So just to summarize where we are with the metabolic management, glycemia management is worse among Maori and Pacific people, but blood pressure management is worse in Europeans. Glycemia management improved since the 1990s, but there's been very little improvement since the 2000s. And there is not much glycemia change within the first 5 years of entering the DCSS, which is largely due to a new diagnosis. And there have been very limited specialist reviews in Counties Manukau District Health Board for people with type 2 diabetes. So what are our options to turn around this trajectory? Well, actually, we have many now. Prevention of type 2 diabetes, I'll comment on a little bit later on, is complicated, but certainly something which we should always be working towards, as there are wider cardiovascular and renal and hypertension and other benefits. The early detection of type 2 diabetes in New Zealand is actually doing very well, as we've seen from Ministry of Health data. But early treatment of diabetes within the first 6 years and the later treatment of diabetes over 6 years, and I've taken that 6 years advisedly, really is the area where we need to focus. And then there's the treatment of complications with high-risk foot clinics and early treatment for retinopathy and so forth. So one of the successes which I'm really delighted is being presented later on this evening is around diabetes remission and total diet replacement. So this relates to the DIRECT study in the UK, where by losing a certain amount of weight through total diet replacement, within 12 months, type 2 diabetes has gone into remission 46% and 36% within 24 months. A significant proportion had weight loss over 15 kilos, and 64% of those that lost over 10 kilos were in remission at 2 years. And there's lower HbA1c and fewer diabetes meds, and recently, in fact, just out now, is that lower proportion needing hypertensive meds as well. And the reason I wanted to share this for you today is that we're trying to take DIRECT around the world. We really want to see this remission service within that first 6 years, which is when DIRECT was operating. And we really want to see a blunting of the number of people with diabetes as a result, if people can take it up. One of the issues is how to take this. That was within a study, but this is now being implemented across the UK and elsewhere. And in Southwest Sydney, we've also set up a remission service And we've had a number of people with type 2 diabetes come in, 12 weeks of total diet replacement, the usual inclusion criteria, and the outcomes being weight reduction, improvement in H1C, and reduction in medications. And these are our findings. You can see that the patients are very typical with BMI of 37 and H1C around 7.2% because they're within the first 6 years, but a big range. And why this study is important is that we made sure that the direct was working through primary care, and that included both solo practitioners and very large practices with up to 14 GPs. And most practices had a nurse, but not all of them. And you can see that the weight reduction is over 12 kilos over the 3 months, but the H1C has plummeted from 55 millimoles per mole down to 41. But really important as well is that the proportion needing medications went down from 14 out of 22 to 1 at 12 weeks. And those blood pressure medications went down from 9 to 1. And in fact, being on with taking total diet replacement is much cheaper because of the reduction in drugs and the replacement of the food. So this is something that is actually affordable for most people. So the second area of success, as we mentioned, was that Pharmac has now approved access to the GLP-1 receptor agonist and one SGLT2 inhibitor. And we've had even more evidence for these since the last summit, and tremendous impact on the progression to renal disease. But we also know that we've got to get that access early. We do not want obstacles in the way. How can we do this? So one of the areas where there's now increasing amounts of work internationally is on integrated diabetes care, particularly with the diabetes specialists going out into the community working with general practice teams. And my PhD student, Ritu Zarora, she's undertaken the first meta-analysis of the pre-post studies, and you can see those, a number in New South Wales. And you can see that the H1C has dropped by 8 millimole per mole on average, and the systolic and diastolic blood pressure have dropped by 3 out of 4. So these are very effective interventions. And generally speaking, patients are only discussed once. So this is really very cost effective. One intervention for just a few minutes, look at those changes. And so this is how case conferencing works, hopefully not quite as confrontational as this, but there's the data, and then there's the team with the GP and the endocrinologist and the practice nurse, perhaps an educator depending on the team. And the aim of the case conferencing is that for that patient in front of you, or not in front of you as happens, but the general practice patient, the specialist provides clinical support to help set up the 12-month annual plan for that patient. And they go through the data, and it only takes 10 or 15 minutes for most, some 20 minutes. But the GP learns from that discussion, so it provides learning opportunities and increases their confidence. And the evidence from Hunter New England in New South Wales is that from a discussion with just 1 or 2 patients, the general practitioner then takes that confidence and that knowledge and applies it across the practice. So this has an accumulator effect. This is a terrific, very cheap intervention for the outcomes and the benefits. But it also makes relationships between the general practitioner, the practice team and others around them, and the specialist services, so that in the future, it's much easier to have other access to someone who perhaps needs to be seen in the specialist clinics, or perhaps can be seen again in the case conferencing, or perhaps just telephone advice. Now, the patient in the ones that we do is usually not there. And I know this is a whānau and patient-focused summit today, but it can be an option, and sometimes it's really helpful having both the specialist and the GP talking together and seeing the patient together with the practice nurse and singing from the same hymn sheet. It's really important that the GP time is paid for. This does take up time, and organising these also needs to be paid for. It takes admin time to arrange when diabetes specialists and the GPs can be together. And we feel that there should be a designated diabetes specialist allocated to each practice to build those relationships, allows the case conferencing to go quicker, allows wider discussions at other times to improve, and just overall a more integrated approach to people with diabetes in the community. The case conferences that we do are those with higher risk factors, nephropathy, women planning or at risk of pregnancy to try to avoid the risk of malformations or reduce the risk of malformations. It doesn't have to be just that group, that's the ones that we use. And here again is from Ritu, my PhD student, who's evaluated the first over 500 of these case conferences from a single visit and discussion taking 15 minutes. Downstream, you can see a 10 millimole per mole drop in H1C. Blood pressure having dropped 9/3. The weight is down as well with the advice, and lipids are down as well. So a key intervention has been adding those new agents so they can be started much earlier rather than waiting. As I mentioned, we'd love to have prevention programs. We're growing those here in the Pacific community in Sydney, and obviously they're also in New Zealand. These take quite some time, and they obviously need to be tailored to the cultural and wider needs of the community and the people with diabetes and the family needs. And the same really for obviously any management. However, we're often asked, well, you know, what's more important, prevention of diabetes or treatment of diabetes? Because everyone jumps into prevention, but it's incredibly complicated and takes a lot of time to organize. So my colleague, Diana Magliano and Jed Morton, they've actually compared what the difference in outcomes are for end-stage kidney disease in Australia of introducing the SGLT2 inhibitor use as early as possible versus two types of prevention of programs. One is to have a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, and the second one are those lifestyle programs like the Diabetes Prevention Program, which we know are very successful. And these are the results. I'm obviously limited by time, but these are the results. And you can see in green the projected end-stage kidney disease going up over time. You can see in the red and the mauvish what happens with those two lifestyle interventions. And yeah, they curb those numbers a little bit, and there is a downward dip at the end. But there you can see in maroon above the orange one with those SGLT2 inhibitors. The impact is immediate, and there's a 20% reduction and a much greater reduction immediately than those prevention programs that take quite a long time to introduce. But the addition of them both, there is a downward dip in terms of the numbers having end-stage kidney disease, so this becomes much more sustainable. So we need both. But the immediatest thing to get in as early as we can for those that it's appropriate for are those who are those SGLT2 inhibitors. So as I mentioned with the case conferencing, sometimes it takes that little bit of advice to get those new medications in and that new approaches to management and to lifestyle and the referrals for dietetic input and so forth. So we know that clinical inertia has been and is a major issue. But this inertia is not just clinical. On the left, you can see a paper that we published around implementing the South Auckland Diabetes Plan. That plan was launched in 1992. In 1993, North Health, for those that remember the regional health authorities, evaluated the plan and they supported it and they said this should be funded and go ahead. And in 1994, we published that plan in the New Zealand Medical Journal. That was the first district diabetes plan ever published globally. We went back in 2000 and reviewed the progress. And there had been progress in a number of areas through those involved in the diabetes services of different sorts, whether that was the Diabetes Projects Trust or any of the other services around in South Auckland, diabetes services in South Auckland. So they'd moved ahead, but there was no coordinator. There was no process to respond to clinical incidents and complaints. There was no real increase in staffing. And in fact, really the progress had been limited by the wider interventions that had been recommended by the Diabetes Plan. And here we are in 2021, 30 years later, 250,000 with diabetes and dialysis units growing. It's really, really disappointing to say the least. So how should we address this inertia? Well, when we started with the Diabetes Plan, we had our advisory group, our board. We had the Diabetes Care Support Service as a monitoring system, and we had a plan. We had a limited number of interventions, but we had some, but many were not invested in. And now we have so many things that need investment. We have prevention, we have remission, we have how we get access to the drugs as soon as we can. We have case conferencing, how we support primary care in different ways. And we still know specialist services where patients are more complex and need to be seen more often and in person rather than through the general practitioner alone, because of course it's a team, an integrated approach. So for that, we need funding and we need a coordinator to make sure that those additional services are there and they are coordinated and that the integration happens, and we need this now. So we need some way to make sure that these things happen. They didn't happen before, in spite of the support of North Health, in spite of all of the evidence that we generated. So how do we address this inertia from a governance and a management perspective? We've had lots of discussions around this, and clearly it goes above where we've been before. So does this need legislation? Does this need a statutory body to monitor and report and require agencies and the government to monitor and to put into place the interventions to make sure at least they're available as we address some of the wider barriers for individuals to self-manage? Maybe this needs an ombudsman with the power to find bodies that do not address the plan and achieve the targets that we would expect. Or maybe there's some other way to address the inertia. But either way, it's very clear from someone who worked on the diabetes plan in the early 90s and all the way through, trying to set up these interventions, which had that major impact on reducing the H1C and improving things at that time, and working with my colleagues since then across South Auckland, and there have been many who've tried to deal with this, but it requires something much more than 6.5% turning up to the diabetes specialist clinics. It needs more being able to be seen there. It needs more of the specialist services in the community working with general practitioners, and more GP time paid for to see those people with diabetes and to overcome those barriers like costs, for example, for people with diabetes to see the GP. In many countries in the world, it's free. In the UK, it's free to see a GP about your diabetes. Same thing happens in, here I am in Australia. There is no gap payment, as we would call it. So there are a range of things that need to be in place. People with diabetes to see the GP. In many countries in the world, it's free. In the UK, it's free to see a GP about your diabetes. Team members, same thing happens into their practices year after year. I'd like to thank the executive group of the Diabetes Care Support Service, all of those named there, and all of those within what went from the South Auckland Diabetes Project to the Diabetes Projects Trust to Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa, to the Diabetes Projects Trust or Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa, members and board, past and present, and particularly those that were there from the beginning, some of whom unfortunately didn't make it all the way, such as the late Issy, and the funders, contract managers, and supported in the district health boards, and all the people who've tried to make a difference. And I'd also, of course, like to thank my team here in Australia, Rita Zarora, my PhD student, and the Direct Australia team in total. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, David. I'd like to introduce Dr. Brandon Orr-Walker now, who we've asked to make comments on David's talk. So Brandon is an Auckland trained endocrinologist. He's been working at Middlemore Hospital since 2001, and he was recruited to set up an endocrinology service there. Currently clinical head of endocrinology and diabetes in Middlemore. Brandon's worked on a number of roles relevant to diabetes, including medical director, Let's Beat Diabetes, a large, wide-ranging program aiming to prevent diabetes in an ethnically diverse, high-risk population and improve care for those with diabetes 2005 to 2010. The Minister of Health's advisor for diabetes and cardiovascular disease 2010 to 2012, and served on a number of advisory and guideline groups nationally and internationally. Immediate past president of the New Zealand Society for the Study of Diabetes, nationally recognised clinical advisory and reference group on matters diabetes. Was part of the expert group who produced updated guidelines for diabetes management in 2021. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you, John. And I'm not sure if David's able to hear us from over in New South Wales, but fantastic talk, David, and it's lovely to hear from you, and sorry you can't be here. I'd like to just make a big call out to the Foundation Aotearoa for putting on this event. It's a courageous thing to do, to continue to raise the importance of diabetes and of course to continue to host it during these very uncertain times. And to the audience tonight, thanks for giving up your time for this very important thing, when I guess a lot of our bandwidth on health has been taken up with other matters at the moment. I'm just going to spend a few moments really and just identify just a few comments. David's talk, I think, is very comprehensive, and he's given us a good breakdown really of the issues as they've been, the response that we've taken, the ongoing challenges, and some hope really to look forward to. So the first comment I'd make is that the propensity of populations to develop type 2 diabetes with increasing rates have been known for a long time, and of huge relevance to our high-risk ethnicities. The propensity in Maori and Pacific peoples was first identified in the 1960s, and pretty much 50 years ago this could have in many ways have been predicted. For a long time, and David's given you the history locally in counties Manukau, and nationally it started perhaps around 1997 to 2000, there have been strategies after strategies and priorities stated after priorities for health in terms of diabetes, in terms of obesity, and increasingly in terms of framing it in terms of an equities issue. And there's probably not a single strategy, and David's given you examples of some of the very good work that was put forward in the 1990s. There's probably not been a single strategy which has not been good in intention, but unfortunately the implementation and the outcomes achieved have been less than those desired. And I think one has to, as David said, identify what those issues are, and I'll identify a few of those today. But it is difficult to imagine as we go through health sector reform, which we're about to go through, where we will lose local governance. And that was through health boards, which were elected and appointed with really only one mandate, and that is for the health of their local population. It's hard to imagine with a loss of that, how we're going to necessarily get greater governance and responsiveness to the population's needs. The second point I'll make very clearly, and I think it's important to say, is that I am not aware of a single prediction in terms of type 2 diabetes that has been made over the years, which has been anything other than optimistic. What I mean by that is, as David showed, the prevalence of diabetes that we modeled all of those years ago, and we modeled them again in about 2010, has turned out to be an underestimate. The rates of harm that this condition can do to the population at large has been an underestimate. And I think the increasing rates of hospitalization for heart disease and for kidney disease that David showed as hard evidence of that is incredibly alarming. And as he pointed out very properly, hidden in those figures are the fact that it occurs so much younger for Maori and Pacific peoples in general. And this is one aspect of the persisting disparities that continue to exist. And unless we're able to deal with the disparities that are enveloped within what we call diabetes, we will continue to have major health and other disparities in our wider community. David spoke a bit about inertia, and I just want to make a special plea for that. Inertia is the failure to do things in a timely way. And the evidence with diabetes is, as David's highlighted in a few examples, and in particular with the direct study, is the earlier you make a difference, the better the long-term outcome will be. The sooner you put on the brakes, the less likely you will have the collision. The sooner you start to plan for your future, the more likely you will get to see it. And there is absolute truth in that with regard to diabetes. Inertia is the failure to achieve that. And as he's pointed out, as elsewhere, the hardest of all of those to achieve has been to get good glucose control early and sustainably. The problem with inertia is that it is easy to embed it, and the more that inertia occurs, the more normalized it is, the more it is just like we already have, and no one really calls it out for that. From a clinical point of view, inertia is the way that we contribute to disparities. What I mean by that is every single intervention that we offer, be that a medicine or be it some other form of therapy, gives benefit in a way that is proportional to the person's need. So if you have the worst glucose control, the treatment we can offer will offer you the greatest benefit. If you have the highest risk of having, for example, a heart attack or kidney disease, the treatment will give you the most benefit. In a sense, all of the therapies that we offer are, if you like, pro-equity. They offer the most for those that need the most. All of the therapies we offer, being pro-equity, help to minimize, in some extent or another, the inequity. And so we must look at what is being offered and call out any degree of inertia. Now, the designs that have been created over the years, the chronic care management scheme, which funded over 1.5 million practice nurse hours, 500,000 GP visits, was designed to decrease inertia, to fund access for people most vulnerable in terms of the cost, for example, for services, to reduce barriers between primary and secondary care. But in fact, they probably achieve the opposite. David's identified a lack of specialist input at Counties Manukau. It is hard to believe that that should be the case, but it is one of those things. And he's also talked about access to therapies, and in particular the newer therapies. And it's a fantastic thing this year, an update from the previous summit, that we have now had access to those medicines. He's shown us the SGLT2 inhibitors. That was from February the 1st this year, and announced only the week before last, and available from next week, we will have one of those medicines called a GLP-1 receptor agonist as a funded available medicine for people with type 2 diabetes and risk factors to cardiovascular or renal disease. So there is some reason to have optimism, but there's also some reason to continue to want to drive for high-level clinical governance and to eradicate clinical inertia. So I welcome questions and comments about this, and in particular to turn the conversation right back to what the summit's about, which is very much about the patient and the patient's whānau perspective about how the system and how clinicians within the system can best support the best outcomes for people, so that diabetes is not occurring, causing harm a decade younger, death a decade younger for Maori and Pacific people, and in general for people with diabetes compared with those without diabetes. So thank you for your time. And again, thank you, David, for a wonderful plenary speech.
Thank you, Brandon. There have been no questions from the chat line, so perhaps I might start by asking David a question. David, are you still there?
Yep. Can you hear me, see me?
We can.
Goody.
David, you mentioned the COVID pandemic in one of your introductory slides. This is of great interest to the audience in view of the current COVID Delta outbreak in New Zealand and New South Wales. Southwest Sydney has a similar demographic to South Auckland. You've told me that before, with large Maori and Pacific communities. Can you tell us what's going on there? And can you comment on the association between COVID and diabetes and poor health outcomes?
Yes, sadly I can. I'm at Campbelltown Hospital. Southwest Sydney is the front line with Western Sydney, and in our hospital, which is much smaller than Middlemore, we have a building the building which has been slowed down and stopped because of COVID, because the workers can't go there to keep building. So we have 2 wards that are full of people with COVID. We've opened our 3rd one today. Our junior staff have been taken to staff the junior ward. We have our intensive care unit full. We have intensive care units full across the city. People are being transferred also slightly to the south, to Wollongong. And it really is a huge issue for us, as those who are not immunized are largely the people who come in. And what we've now had to set up from the diabetes service is that we have about half to 3/4 of those on the wards have diabetes. So we're having to do a 1 hour a day ward round online because the staffing on the wards is short and we're just having to help people. So 1 hour a day of my advanced trainee is contacting and giving advice on those individual patients. We have to do, because as I said, it's half to 3/4. If they're given dexamethasone, obviously the sugars go up, and these are very complex patients, and many of them do end up in intensive care as well. So it's a huge impact, and those that are worse off are those who have diabetes, and the death rates are higher in those who have diabetes. And immunization is just number 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the moment. As soon as you can get immunized, just do that. The risks are really very, very small and trivial in comparison to the risks from this terrible disease for those who are not vaccinated. So that's really where we are. We're expecting to go up to 1,400 a day. Just last week it was only 100 or 200. Now we're up to just over 1,000 today, and we think 400 to 1,400. We were predicting a 4,000 peak, but with the rapid rollout of vaccination, that looks as though that's going to be less. So we're hoping to hit peak in about 3 or 4 weeks. But who really knows? I mean, this is an evolving situation, and it's pretty shocking for us because we were doing quite well until Delta came along. So that's where we are.
Thank you, David. That's truly shocking. I have a question for Brandon, unless Sella, you have a question you'd like to ask?
Oh yes, kia ora. I had one for you, Brandon, around diabetes and its complications. It seems to be a major public health issue in South Auckland for Māori and Pacific communities. With the government's proposal around the health sector reforms and obviously the setup of an independent Māori health authority, what do you see as some other possible solutions that we could implement? Thinking about free GP visits, removal of prescription fees for Māori and Pacific patients, and maybe even a district diabetes plan. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Sella, and good evening. Nice to speak with you about this. So it is, as you say, there's a huge issue for Māori and for Pacific peoples as well with diabetes, and a lot of this relates to a propensity to the complications and a realization that a lot of the risks associated with this are socio-demographic. The biggest, I think one of the biggest difficulties we've had in health, and we've tried to extend this across sectors, and this has occurred, we did a lot of work in this field in Let's Beat Diabetes now 15 plus years ago, is the levers or the determinants, if you like, of a lot of this do not sit within health. So I think one of, later actually, today when we're talking a bit about obesity, in a pre-recorded session I think one of the real critical things that health sector people do, in particular those in governance level, they need to actually acknowledge that unless we change some of the settings in society more broadly, we won't actually be able to achieve a lot of health equity. Unless we can deal with the issues of obesity, which is so strongly socio-demographically stratified, we won't be able to do that. I think one of the risks is that people assume that good health plans and good health professionals, and the broadest sense of the words, will be able to solve these problems, and I don't believe we can. I think there are clearly barriers to care, but just removing those barriers as we see them, for example, visits to doctors, access to no co-funded script fees, etc., have not been enough previously, and I don't think we fully understand why that is. So I'll give you an example. In the chronic care management program, which I've alluded to, and subsequent programs that came from that, there were free visits. So for example, chronic care management diabetes was 4 free GP visits a year, plus 7 free funded nurse hours per patient. And the entry criteria could include having diabetes, being a smoker, and having an ambulatory sensitive hospital admission, which was a pretty broad group of people. And yet at the outcome of that was a 15-fold variation in achieved metrics, the sort of things that David showed us, like achieved blood pressure control, achieved cholesterol control, achieved glucose control. And a large amount of effort was put into that. Now, there are still disparities, of course, that are not line items on health costs. The access to the practice, the time taken off work when you've had a lot of sick time, etc., transport and other things. So it'll have to be very comprehensive. So I'm sorry that's answering with your question with a problem, but I think unless these problems are able to be worked through, we won't be able to see a reality on the ground.
Yeah, really, you know, can consider, I suppose, some of those outside of health responses, such as the built environments in which many in South Auckland
Yeah, sorry, you've frozen. Yeah, that's right. The built environment is clearly incredibly important, and those drivers, as I say, to health inequities more broadly, and poverty is clearly one of those.
Thank you, Brandon. I've got one last question for David, if you're still there, David.
Yeah, I'm here.
In your talk, how to address inertia slide, you mentioned possible legislative changes and appointment of an ombudsman. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that, what you mean by legislative changes. And are there examples of a diabetes ombudsman that have worked in Australia or other countries? So it's a double question.
Yeah, there isn't an ombudsman, as far as I know, anywhere globally. But there are a number of measures that can be taken against organisations of different sorts that don't act. So in the UK, there's something called a never event. So if in the UK, this is within a hospital, a person dies as a result of insulin maladministration, then that hospital is fined £1 million, like that. So I think that is something where the chief executive officers and managers and others who are responsible perhaps for not having adequate staffing and so forth, they do think about these things, because as much as we want to talk about health, the financial side is there, and those involved with organisations have to think both about the financial and the health, and quite often the financial side takes over. So, and we've seen that many years in many places. And diabetes, you can kick the can down the road another 10 years and you don't get an immediate response from the electorate. So one of the other things around this is it means it can, if it's a body that can continue through elections, that it's not dependent on any one administration. So whether that is an ombudsman, whether it's some sort of legislation, we need something that's going to ensure that people are focused. I think you know, something which is an independent Māori authority, for example, can take responsibility from the Māori point of view, which is good. And I think that it's good that people are responsible and they can decide whether they want to put money into removing barriers of different sorts. I think that doesn't necessarily obviously have to just be hospitals. That can be outpatient services, ambulatory services, not having case conferencing, not having proper access to GPs or drugs, or maybe not supporting that built environment changes, not supporting other aspects in terms of lifestyle, not supporting people perhaps within individual communities who can be the kind of captains on the block type approach. We work a lot with peer support facilitators and within communities. We have a whole program across 48 Pacific churches in Sydney at the moment, which again has been put on hold because of COVID, where we're trying to address so many of those determinants from within the community, which is so vital, because, you know, a lot of this, as you're saying, Brandon, this is not really a health issue. This is a social issue, or as someone has said online, these are sort of sociocultural impacts, and we need to look a lot broader than the health side. We're looking at working with local government with another project for prevention. So we're looking at any of those community agencies, and essentially once a body is required, has a statutory responsibility to address the safety and the quality of the community, then we have a different lever in which we can say, look, you did not allow access to whatever it is that people agree is the right approach, whether it be cycling lanes, whether it be safe places to walk, where, you know, where you can even do running, whatever it is. So those are parts of that kind of approach where we need to actually have some proper lever now. It's pretty clear that us planning and the community planning does not have enough leverage to get the changes that we require. And that includes the lifestyle prevention side and those other wider supports, as well as within the clinical aspects.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Brandon, for that outstanding contribution. Time is pressing, so I think we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Karen Pickering is going to present a small talk on a medication project update. Karen's the manager of Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa since 2000. Karen has a nursing background and spent years working at Middlemore Hospital and in other public and private facilities. She's developed a passion for preventing diabetes and its complications, which led to her studying public health. And she's done an outstanding job as the general manager of our facility. I'd like to introduce Karen.
Kia ora koutou. I just want to do a quick update on a project we've got running in South Auckland at the moment. This project is about increasing the uptake of the newly funded type 2 diabetes medications, that's Jardiance and Trulicity. While I was writing this last week, we had a contractor come into the office who delighted in telling us what a difference one of these medications had made to his life. He'd lost 8 kilos. His blood sugar control had improved out of sight and he felt wonderful. He felt so good that he'd passed this on to a friend of his. The friend had asked his GP and he was having similar results. Now, this is the sort of effect that we want to try and achieve to make sure that everybody who needs the medications most, those who often are less likely to access medications or have a harder time getting them in a timely fashion, get what they need. So to do this, we're working with a PR company called Blackland PR. They have developed a range of tools in consultation with a number of people, and these tools are very brief and to the point and take the form of online material and leaflets. The leaflets have a QR code on them which go to a site which has got more information, and there is also a tool where individuals can put their details in, put their GP name down, and a message will be sent to the GP to say this person would be interested in knowing if this medication would suit them. To do it, the PR company has recruited students from AUT. The students from AUT are working with influencers across the community. They're doing this online and through networks and in person. Distribution of lots of leaflets, because we all know that many people don't have reliable internet access or may not be computer literate, but also wide contact, for example, via social media. To come, there will be some media presence, and an example we've got is some radio stations have offered free time to these students to talk about the project. So at the moment, all I can really describe is the process, and we can't offer anything in terms of evaluation or how things are actually working, and obviously COVID has had an impact on this, and we certainly recognise that because this relies to a certain extent on GP participation, that their support has to be very highly valued at the moment, because we know that they are very, very busy. I would like to say thank you to Foundation North for providing funding, along with Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa, and I'd like to thank Blackland PR and the students, influencers and other members of the community who have participated in this project, and I look forward to reporting more at a later stage.
Thank you, Karen. What Karen is referring to here, of course, is as Brandon has mentioned in his talk, the funding by Pharmac of 2 new diabetes drugs in 2021, empagliflozin in February, and dolaglutide Trulicity from September. And these drugs promise to be game changers for the diabetes population. We know that from past experience, when Pharmac funds new drugs, and they haven't done this very often in diabetes sector, probably not for the last 15 years, but uptake of the new diabetes drugs can be very slow. And there's probably a number of reasons for this, lack of public knowledge and awareness of the new medication. And then as Brandon has alluded to, the conservatism of doctors getting around to prescribing medicines. So this project is to try and address those kind of issues. And I'd like to share my screen if I can. This is just for your information, a copy of the pamphlet. And as Karen has mentioned, 15,000 of those pamphlets have been distributed in the community through influencers. So this is very much a grassroots campaign. I should say that Pharmac is also running a promotional campaign through a PR company in Hamilton to much the same effect, except their PR campaign is more a social media campaign, whereas, as I said, ours is grassroots to the community. It remains to be seen, as Karen has said, how well this has worked, but we feel that it was important to stick our oar in the water with this one. Unless there are any questions from the audience on that, I would suggest that we should move on to the next topic on the program.
Yeah, thanks, John. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yep, you can. So I think, you know, this is a form of direct to consumer, and is actually, in the modern way, I think we can call that patient-centric. It's not that long ago that direct to consumer marketing of therapies was viewed as somehow a bad thing. It might be by the pharmaceutical companies for their profit, not necessarily for patients. But as John, you said, that there's been a great conservatism, both in terms of Pharmac funding and doctors and others taking up these treatments. And I think the raising public awareness and for patients and their whānau to be raising the question, hey, would this be suitable for me, is a really good option. These are evidence-based, game-changing medications that can really change the trajectory of diabetes and the harm that could otherwise occur. So I think it's a great thing for this to be done. And, you know, it'd be excellent to see how this goes. As you mentioned, John, there's been huge gaps. There was a 14-year gap, 4-year gap between any medication, new medication being funded by Pharmac for glucose control in New Zealand. And then one came on that was no longer even being used in Australia, and there was almost no promotion material for it. And that was nearly 36 months ago. And now we have these 2 new medicines, which are huge. So we'd love to see very high uptake very quickly with them.
Thank you, Brandon. Just one final comment to our audience. We do have another 5,000 leaflets to be distributed. So if anybody wants to take any of those leaflets and distribute them to the South Auckland community, we'd be very grateful. So I might move on now and ask Sela to introduce the next topic. Sela.
Kia ora. Sorry, hopefully my internet doesn't cut out again. Our next program item is going back to Dr. Brandon Walker. The title of his conversation with us tonight will be the Adolescent Bariatric Surgery Program. And a part of his conversation.
We seem to have lost Sela to the internet. So I should proceed to Brandon's talk, and I see him chuckling away there in the background.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a strange situation we find ourselves in, with this needing to be in part pre-recorded, and of course the meeting all being run virtually through Zoom. But I welcome you to the evening, and I give you genuine thanks for spending some time to be part of this discussion. Obviously, we've got a lot of other considerations at the moment due to COVID, and the way we're conducting things is not usual, but we're pretty used to not usual transmission at the moment. So my part of this talk is really to set the stage really with regard to why we are interested in obesity in young adults and why we have embarked upon a pilot to look at medical and, if accepted, surgical therapies for obesity in this young age group. So I've broken the talk up into just a few sort of questions really to consider, and I'll try and address those. Unfortunately, I haven't got any slides to share with you. It's difficult in this format, and so this is more conversational, but hopefully it will stimulate you and dovetail nicely with the presentations that follow. So really, what are we talking about? Well, what we're talking about is the high prevalence of obesity in our society. Our most recent figures in New Zealand, that's from 2019-2020 health surveys, show that around 1 in 3 adults in New Zealand has obesity. However, there's a huge gradient across society, and it's nearly 2/3 of Pacific people, half of Maori, and about 1/3 of European, with only Asian adults being at a lower prevalence. Really significant in terms of understanding this is that there is a huge socio-demographic gradient, with those most socioeconomically deprived about 2-fold more likely to be obese compared with those who are not. Now, the story is even more concerning, I think, in children. Overall, about 1 in 10 children are defined as being obese, but 30% of Pacific and about 1 in 7 Maori children are obese. This is aged 2 to 14. And here, the socioeconomic gradient is even stronger, 2.7-fold between the most deprived and the least deprived. Now, the relationships between social deprivation and obesity are complicated. They've probably got some bi-directional factor, but I think we can all agree for children, at least, who have no contribution, if you like, to the social status of their family, that this has clearly got some causative link. Now, this isn't the New Zealand that people like me grew up in, and anyone of my generation. In fact, it's a huge tragedy. It's happened on our watch. And I have to say that without sorting this out, frankly, all the discussion about health inequity in this country at the moment will be lame. We've got to sort out this obesity problem. So what's been done about it to date? Well, evidently not enough. There are so many paradoxes. So, for example, traditionally, poverty was associated with thinness and wealth with obesity. And when I say the word traditionally, what I mean is all of our existence on this planet as a species until about the last 40 years, maybe a little bit longer, except for the effects of war and famine, where we had loss of food security. Strangely now, loss of food security is seen as a cause of obesity, not a cause of thinness in our environment. Well, the response has been that there's been task force after task force, strategies after strategies, both internationally, indeed locally and nationally here in New Zealand. And whilst this has occurred, obesity rates have been growing markedly. This is not only in the so-called developed world countries like New Zealand, but also very concerningly in the developing nations, and at a pace that really defies any explanation through genetics or other selections. It can't be explained by personal health aspects alone or personal behaviours alone. What's really critical is that it hugely challenges the health of the human population and indeed the sustainability of health systems to even try to mitigate the effects. Now, I think it's time we get really honest about that. There's a real risk that words on the paper promising a response here or there without actually having the levers to make a difference might actually be an impediment, give false sense of security, if you like. We also need to be able to broach and understand the vulnerability factors, whatever they may be they social, cultural, as well as those economic ones I've already alluded to, if we are really going to be able to make an impact on this. I just want to highlight a couple of recent major governmental reports in New Zealand, and I've got them here. Probably be able to see them on camera. The first is the Food Industry Task Force on addressing factors contributing to obesity. Now, I've only printed out the first few pages of it. It was released in December 2018, it's 143 pages long, and it was based on asking for information and suggestions from the companies that work in the food industry, indeed profit from food manufacture and delivery. And it was done by a survey. And they've come up with 51 general recommendations across 5 major areas. Those are food and beverage formulation and innovation, employee health and wellness programs, community and education initiatives, food and beverage marketing, labelling and rollout of health star ratings. You know, to be honest, it's hard to see how these are all going to make a huge difference, but let's take it from the fact that this report was delivered to 2 ministers at the time, the then health minister and the food minister, that they see that the food environment is a significant part of the problem, and it's recognised that it needs to be part of the solution. The second one, which I just want to spend a moment on as well, which is relevant to, if you like, setting the stage for what we are proposing to do and have started to do, is the clinical guidelines for weight management in New Zealand children and young people referring really to young adults in this setting. This was produced in 2016. It's 22 pages long and is an update really from earlier guidelines which were developed in 2009. Now, critically, it acknowledges that the situation has got worse since that earlier guideline was developed. Now, I have to say that there's some absolutely great people, a number of colleagues and other people, I greatly respect their views on this. But I'm really not certain that all of the so-called 4-stage pathway, which is designed to facilitate clinical decision-making, that's their words, is really going to sort out this problem. It relies firstly so much on primary care to do the delivery, and I think we've already heard tonight in Professor David Simmons' real-life audit spanning a full generation that primary care have struggled to deal with diabetes care, where the tools and the approaches, or if you like, the paradigm of treatment is better researched, and we've in fact seen the problems grow over time. So what are these 4 stages that they talk about? Well, the first one is to monitor it, and they define overweight as any individual greater than the 91st percentile for their age, and obese is over 98%. Well, who would have thought we had a problem when we have already got 30% of Pacific children squeezed into the top 2%? I'm really imagining what the step looks like in a South Auckland primary care practice now, and I think we know the answer. It is that a large proportion of children we already know have this problem, and monitoring it is really just going to individualize that. The second step is to what they call assess, and it says take a full history and examination looking for underlying causes and comorbidities. What, of 30% of the population? I think we already know what the themes are, and I've already covered those before. The third step is what's called managing, and this is a quote, "The aim is to slow weight gain so the child or young person can grow into their weight." Really? So we must be expecting a nation of NBA basketball centers in this. I'll give you an example. Healthy BMI for a young adult or child of 120 kilograms is achieved in anyone who's more than 2.19 meters tall. That's 7'2", that's good NBA center material. What I would say about this is at least this step acknowledges the social and family context and the food and drink and activity. It has a strange interest really in sleeping time, which I think is probably not the biggest issue here. The fourth of all of these strategies is to maintain these positive changes. Now, in fairness to the strategy, I don't really mean to berate it. It does give some helpful recommendations, suggest what features and examples might be of successful approaches, and provide some resources. But honestly, it really seems a little bit like moving the deck chairs while the Titanic is sinking. So really, what must we do much more? Well, all of the public health successes that we know have required much more than just education or information sharing or fostering personal behaviour choices or indeed having environmental responses. They've required all of these approaches together. And we know that now, more than ever, when we think a little bit about what's undergoing with society with regard to COVID, surely we understand that this requires a true whole of society approach and a wide range of approaches to manage this. So the problem is faced with other so-called non-communicable diseases of diabetes and type 2 diabetes is that we haven't learnt that yet. We have for injury prevention, and we have for the communicable diseases, and I've just given you the example of COVID, but for others as well. The problem with the non-communicable diseases is that they sit in a so-called cozy place of how we spend our lives and our comfort and in our recreation, eating and so forth. And as such, they're somewhat personal, somewhat culturally ingrained, and somewhat taboo from dealing with. So as an example, because I don't sneeze my non-communicable disease onto you, the government and indeed you have less, if you like, right to get into my life about it. And some would say that's the way it should be, and some would disagree. But let's be very clear here. Tonight, at least, we're speaking about children and young people. We're talking about groups of people that we believe that we must take a protective approach for. Adults, it may be a little bit more difficult. But actually, we do that anyway. For example, I'll give you an idea. If I don't wear a seatbelt in my car, I think we can all agree that that is not likely to cause me to have a car crash and affect, for example, others on the road. And yet it is in statute that I must do so, along with me not speeding, not driving with my cell phone, not being drunk, making sure I'm fully licensed, making sure I have a warranted car, making sure I follow the road code, driving on the right side of the road, etc., driving to the conditions. All of those things, of course, do cause problems with crashes and might affect someone else, just like my sneeze would do, you see. So we already have policy in other areas of health. And again, injury prevention and communicable diseases where the behaviours of individuals are important, and we need to make environmental controls to be able to protect the population at large. Okay, so let's move on. So what have we undertaken to do? Well, I'll be honest with you, it's a small pilot initially to look at an intensive weight loss strategy in high-risk young adults with comorbidity. And we've picked diabetes and pre-diabetes for a number of key reasons. Now, there's a couple of main points to this strategy. The first is that there are multiple dietary approaches have all had similar failure rates and weight loss maintenance challenges, despite actually very different approaches. Low carbohydrate, Mediterranean diet, intermittent fasting, etc. Very different approaches, which apparently have some unique special components to them, all have got similar failure rates. Second key thing is a visit to 2 centres of excellence in the United States that Mr. Richard Baber, who's speaking soon, and I were fortunate to visit in late 2017. And here surgical treatment is offered to young adults in our setting, they're paediatrics in their setting, individuals after at least 6 months of intensive lifestyle and medical management. And this has very strong health coaching, psychosocial support. And the reasons for doing it this way are several and will be briefly touched on, I think, by the later presentations. It's often said the United States of America is the place one goes to see one's future, and indeed be that good or bad. Very importantly, there's evidence now not only from the bariatric surgical literature, but also with very low calorie diets or meal replacement strategies that metabolic derangements, in particular diabetes, can be significantly improved and in fact even diabetes remitted by significant calorie restriction, at least in those with recent diagnosis of diabetes. And I'll mention the DIRECT trial in a moment, which is a very important trial. There's also very recently emerging recognition that type 2 diabetes occurring in young adults is a much more aggressive form of diabetes with marked progression. This has been shown in studies both overseas and also most recently in pediatric populations here in Auckland. It's progressive, it's refractory to medical treatments that we currently have. And of course, a person developing diabetes young is a person who's exposed to the deleterious effects of diabetes for many more years if they are in fact going to survive adulthood to a good age. The real problem we have is that there are few proven medical therapies in this age group, and even clinical trials, which usually are very good at engaging the most motivated and offer huge support, which is hard to replicate in the real world, have struggled to recruit patients. I mean, one study that was recruiting from over 20 countries had to fold after recruiting only 2 young adults for medical therapy, which already had proven benefit in adults. So it's a real struggle to engage this group. Next point I'd make, and it's an important one, and I think Mr. Baber will probably cover it as well, is that bariatrics isn't acceptable or indeed possible for all. So even if the publicly funded programs in New Zealand, if we look at those where there's strong selection on medical comorbidity, females outnumber males 3 to 1, and yet the underlying conditions that we might be treating obesity for are much closer to 50-50 for the 2 genders. And further, the high-risk ethnicities tend to be underrepresented, not only at referral level, but by acceptance of surgery. Now, of course, that's after a process of informed consent and reflects obviously some acceptability to surgical therapies. There are some barriers, obviously, therefore, even when, if you like, in the public sector, the expensive part, the surgery, is being paid for. Now, even if there was widespread acceptability of bariatric surgery, fewer than 1% who met criteria could have the surgery per year. In fact, far fewer than 1%. So it's a great option, but it's not the solution to a public health problem. And look, the final important part for what we are doing, and I want to acknowledge, is the generous support of the Potter Trust and Perpetual Guardians, who have, through COVID lockdown and otherwise, worked with us as we've developed up this program with a lot of slippage along the way due to those issues. I said I'd mention briefly the DIRECT study, because this really, I think, sets up where we want to go. So the DIRECT study was a breakthrough study that showed that very low calorie diets with meal replacements could remit diabetes in about a half of people over a 12-month period of time. Remittance means they had diabetes diagnosed, and through the strategy, they had were able to come off any medicines, and their glucose control sat in the non-diabetic range. It was still 36% at 2-year point, and more than 15% weight loss was achieved in about a quarter of individuals at 12 months, and about 11% out at the 2-year point. And the degree of weight loss strongly predicted the improvement in glucose control, or the remittance of diabetes. There was less medication required, and very importantly, improved quality of life. Now that's in adults. Now, modeling this is a strategy which is what we call cost dominant. In other words, you put in some money to make it happen, and you get out benefit that is greater than that return. It's a fantastic thing. In fact, meal replacement is probably a cost-effective and cost-affordable option for people in their individual lives, because it is by nature displacing other foods. In other words, there is less spend on foods in going for meal replacement. And finally, and as common with bariatric surgery and all of what we're talking about, a change in eating behaviors are an expected part of any of these strategies to lose weight and maintain that weight loss. So, you know, in summary, changing eating by a complex approach, be it by surgery or be it by a range of different dietary approaches, and I've shared with you the meal replacement approach, are key factors to reducing obesity and obesity-related complications. Bariatrics does not invoke more exercise. You may be able to do it as a consequence of being lighter and fitter and less pressure and pain on your joints, but food and eating remain fundamental parts of all of this. Now, there's huge challenges, and I'm going to leave you with those really to set up what some of those are in the later speakers, but these are many. At the individual level, some of these will be touched upon by Kate. This group of individuals have many headwinds. There's obviously the socio-demographics that we've talked about, that 2.7-fold socio-demographic gradient in New Zealand. but there's also very, very significant psychosocial issues and issues of comorbidity to consider. We are involving, in particular in young adults, the involvement, co-option and support of the families and whānau. And this is difficult, in particular in busy families, and difficult to often achieve and continue with engagement. We've also found in our own setting that progress can easily be stalled, in particular with COVID, for example, in terms of continuing to support people in some face-to-face way with their family and whānau. And finally, of course, there's the issue of scalability. With such high rates of obesity, both we've looked at in the child and young adult, but also in the adult, we've got the real issues of scalability when so many are obese and have complications. 60% of Pacific with obesity. In the older adults, 50% have diabetes. Maori, the rates are slightly lower, but still, this is a huge issue across the population. And as you've heard earlier on, diabetes associated with obesity is the world's biggest pandemic at this stage. Anyway, we're going to hear a little bit more tonight about what the outcomes for some of this work is. It's early in place, and again, I thank you for your involvement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brandon. In the interests of time, we should proceed. Might ask my colleague Salah to introduce Richard Baber. Salah.
Kia ora, third time lucky. Let's hope the internet sticks with me this time. Kia ora everyone. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Richard Baber. His talk will be around the role of bariatric surgery. Now, Richard is an upper GI and bariatric surgeon. Richard works as a general upper gastrointestinal and bariatric surgeon at Counties Manukau DHB and Auckland Weight Loss Surgery. His practice includes upper GI and hepatobiliary, sorry, my pronunciation, surgery for malignance and benign disease, as well as bariatric surgery, including laparoscopic sleeve gastrectomy, gastric bypass, and revision of complicated band surgery. So welcoming Richard's presentation now.
Hi, I'm Richard Baber. I'm a bariatric and upper GI surgeon at Counties Manukau DHB, and John Baker, my colleague in the minimal trials groups, asked me to talk about our little project in adolescent bariatric surgery. John approached me about this maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, and he and Brandon Walker were concerned about a group of young people that they were seeing in their diabetes clinic who were morbidly obese, and they felt that this group of young patients, some of them as young as 13, were heading for very, very bad health outcomes as a result of their morbid obesity and diabetes. And this was based on their experience that the prognosis, if you like, in terms of health and quality of life for young people who've reached a level of obesity that makes them diabetic is very poor. So you develop diabetes at a young age and your BMI is greater than 35, 40. Some of these people have a BMI of more than 50, that you're heading for a very poor health outcome in terms of the end organ complications of diabetes at a very young age, probably an early death, but on the way there, a gradual slide down the path of all of the things that we see with diabetes, but in particular renal disease, and that can have a very strong influence on people's quality of life. So they felt like they were providing as best they could the medical side of it and treating the diabetes as best they could. This is a difficult group to treat from a medical point of view and a surgical point of view, and I'll dig into that a little bit more later. And they proposed a trial where we could perhaps offer surgery to some of the people in that group. The medical interventions that were being tried with them had limited success, and certainly had no impact on their obesity. Maybe some of them had better glycemic control, but I mean, it's well established in adults that bariatric surgery is a very effective intervention in type 2 diabetes combined with obesity. And if we can get patients to lose a significant amount of weight and keep it off, and probably the only way to do that in adult patients over a BMI of 35 is to do a bariatric operation on them, then we could get better outcomes for this group of adolescents with a poor outlook. So our experience with adults shows that we can get about 80, somewhere between 75 and 80% of people who have type 2 diabetes as a result of obesity to go into remission. And that means coming off their oral hypoglycemic medications or their insulin in some cases, and having normal blood sugars. This has a lot of implications for their long-term health. It reduces their overall cardiovascular risk and protects them from other end organ damage. So damage to the eyes, damage to the kidneys, the heart, the brain vessels. So there is some experience around the world with offering bariatric surgery to adolescents. Predominantly this is in the United States, but there are other sort of hotbeds of intervention like this. The Middle East is one of them. But it's not a new thing, and there are already several cases being done in Australia by some of my colleagues that I know directly, and there's certainly reports in the literature around offering bariatric surgery to adolescent patients. I had a handful, maybe 2 or 3 patients that I'd offered surgery to in the past on an ad hoc basis, usually in the setting of private bariatric surgery where they're brought to the clinic by their parents rather than referred from other kind of tertiary services, which is a slightly different scenario. In any case, Brandon and I decided that we'd go on a fact-finding tour to the United States to visit 2 centres that had quite a lot of experience in bariatric surgery. We went to the Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and Children's Hospital in Washington, DC, and spent some time there with the surgeons, observed some surgery, looked at the systems that they had in place. It was always going to be a difficult undertaking. The adolescent group of patients are very tricky to deal with. Bariatric surgery, for it to have a good long-term outcome, needs understanding, compliance, and change in behaviour to maintain weight loss into the long term. And adolescents are notoriously difficult to firstly even get to attend, but then let alone change their behaviour. There are a lot of issues around their understanding and consent for surgery. How much do they understand the sort of profound changes that they'll be going, and even adult patients tend to struggle with the profound impact of bariatric surgery on their eating and dietary behaviour. And many patients, probably more than 3/4 of patients that I do bariatric surgery on in the adult group, go through a period where they regret having surgery, and that would be particularly, well, that's a particularly punishing situation for an adolescent to find themselves in unless they've got a lot of support. It became apparent to Brandon and I, and we had some inkling of this before we went, that the systems in place in places like the United States are a little bit different. Firstly, patients tend to seek out bariatric surgery for themselves, so they generally slightly more affluent patients who have insurance, who have been engaged in medical treatment for diabetes and other obesity-related medical problems, and have done their research into bariatric surgery, probably had a lot of counselling from other medical professionals around it, and then they come sort of fairly well prepared and a long way down the decision-making path towards bariatric surgery when they first arrive in the surgeon's office. That's a little bit of contrast to the counties or Manukau sort of group, where they tend to be from relatively less affluent backgrounds, often diverse ethnic backgrounds as well, perhaps lacking in health literacy to the same extent that the American patients are. And they're often, and in this group, what we were proposing would they actually be sent to the surgical clinic without actually seeking it out themselves. So kind of raises a whole bunch of issues around helping them to arrive at the right decision for them, and also keeping them engaged. So the American patients already engaged in the health system, they're doing it voluntarily usually, and then this sort of a natural progression to surgery to help them with their obesity. In this situation, the kids are kind of not that engaged. I think their attendance at the clinic is pretty patchy, and they often live in areas of deprivation, both in terms of money, but food also. So I think we've all heard that expression, food deserts, and there's been quite a lot of focus on this in South Auckland in particular. They may be living in households of a number of adults, and they don't have control of what food comes into the house and how healthy that is. And so, you know, we're very careful, because it would be pointless to do a bariatric operation on a child and then send that child back into an environment where, you know, the food is predominantly carbohydrate based. There's a lot of sugar, soft drinks, all of that sort of stuff, and there's not much understanding in the household or the wider sort of community around the child about taking advantage of that bariatric surgery by having an optimal diet to maintain weight loss. So it's a really complicated situation. These kids, and you know, some of them aren't kids, they're adolescents, but they, and I've met a couple, 3 of them now, quite hard to engage with. They often don't say much. It's very difficult to know whether they understand what they're getting themselves into, if they showing some sign of wanting to progress down the path of surgery. They often come with parents who are perhaps not as educated around the issues of bariatric surgery as the parents of patients who seek it out for themselves. In general, adolescents are a really tricky group, because they are, you know, for bariatric surgery to be successful in the long term in terms of the health outcomes, it requires quite a lot of compliance from patients in terms of their dietary and behaviour exercise. And adolescents are in general a difficult group in terms of compliance, and it's another issue. So we had all these kind of questions around how optimal these patients are to progress down a pathway of bariatric surgery in terms of their preparation and readiness, their understanding of the implications for them, the consent, and their ability to follow the kind of best practice guidelines to get a good result afterwards. Despite what we initially felt, that, you know, knowing what we do as medical professionals about bariatric surgery, is there's probably more reluctance amongst the group who've had a dietary intervention and shown some response to that to actually consider having surgery. So I think so far we've seen maybe 3 or 4 patients in our surgical group. There's a total of 13. We're aiming for a group of 20 and had imagined that maybe half of them would want surgery. I think we had a kind of a slightly naive expectation that there'd be more enthusiasm amongst the patients who've been recruited for surgery, but probably not surprisingly, there's a little bit of reluctance in that group to consider such a dramatic or so drastic and invasive intervention, particularly if they've had some success with dietary interventions, which I think a lot of them have. So, so far we've recruited, I think, 3 or 4 that have been seen in the surgical clinic, and one of those patients has actually progressed to surgery and had surgery. It's fairly recent surgery, so I'm not quite sure right now of how that's playing out. One of my colleagues did it, and our whole group is involved in this trial, so it's not just me. There are 4 other bariatric surgeons who can potentially get involved with patients that sift out to the surgical group. One of my colleagues did a sleeve gastrectomy for one of the patients so far. So we're kind of making very, very slow progress since probably 2016, 17, when this first became an idea. So far we've, worked out the pathways, got the sort of infrastructure in place, and we've managed to do surgery on 1 patient. I can't give you an update on that patient's progress because it's so very recent.
Thank you, Richard. The update we can give you is that 1 patient is doing very well, but Kate might talk to that in a minute. I might ask Salah to introduce Kate, diabetes nurse, who's our next speaker. Salah.
Kia ora. Yes, I'm welcoming Kate Smallman as our next presenter. She's a diabetes specialist nurse, designated prescriber with a master's in science. Originally from the UK, Kate has been living in New Zealand for the last 20 years and in South Auckland. She's a mother of a daughter and grandmother to 2 beautiful boys. Kate has worked in diabetes for the last 35 years and is passionate about prevention of type 2 diabetes and its complications. Kate has worked for the Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa for 20 years, recently involved with research WORTH study and weight loss in adolescents. She teaches at Auckland University on diabetes papers and prescribing papers. Also working in 2 primary care diabetes clinics, seeing patients with diabetes and long-term conditions. Kate is on several committees, is an honorary secretary to the NZSSD, is an accreditation moderator for Aotearoa College of Diabetes Nurses, and is on the PharMac PTAC subcommittee. Welcoming you, Kate.
Good evening. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about our new project about our weight loss with adolescents. So my name is Kate Smallman and I'm a diabetes nurse specialist and I work for the Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa. So the title is Where the Words Meet Reality, Adolescent Experience. So firstly, I'd like to thank our funders. So we've got Perpetual Guardians Trust and the Freemasons Foundation Potter Trust. So thank you very much, because without the support of these funders, we would be unable to do the project. So tonight I'd like to introduce you to the team, some of which you've already heard on the evening sessions. So first of all, we've got Dr. John Baker, Dr. Brandon O'Walker and Dr. Richard Baber. We've got Diana Anderson, who's our nutritionist, who talks to our young people about their weight loss and about the food that they're eating and helping to make sustainable changes. And then we've got Trish Harry, who I've put here with little ducks because she tries to keep us all in a row. She's keeping the young people informed, that they're getting appointments, where the clinics are, whether they've got the right product, whether we've got little projects going. So it might be exercise projects and little challenges. So she's a great one that's making sure that we're all in the right place at the right time, doing all the right information. And then you've got Kate Smallman at the end, which is myself, who's the diabetes nurse specialist. So really, starting at the beginning, you know, the first slide I showed a lovely picture of us being on the beach and water and surfing. And that's our ideal thought of what New Zealand is like. But actually, this is reality. The reality is that we have fizzy drinks, we have fried chicken, we've got white bread, we've got pastries, and of course, we've got COVID-19. So the COVID-19 testing has been in Aotearoa Centre now for nearly 18 months. So we're very well aware of what's going on. So how did we start this project? Well, we started last year and COVID happened in March, so it stopped the recruitment plan. We then started with a small group, and then of course COVID hit again in August. So we've been actually running quite nicely, and then of course COVID's hit again. So the idea was to present with 20 participants between the age of 15 and 18. They needed all to have a BMI above 35 and have pre or type 2 diabetes. And so far we've recruited 14. So the plan was that this was going to take us 1.25 years. We were going to start with 3 months intensive lifestyle intervention, aiming for 8% weight loss using Optifast. Then they could be referred on to bariatric surgery if they wanted to. So they got an appointment to go and see the surgeons and have a chat with them about it. We then continue for the next year, really with maintenance, because we all know that we lose weight, but actually it's about sustainability. And we're looking at how can we sustain the weight loss. And this should be done in group-based, online, phone support, with the product, with whānau, with family involvement. So this is our 14 young people we've got, and there's a lot of information here, so I'm going to take us through step by step. So the young people are aged between 15 and 18, 8 Tongan, 5 Samoan, 1 New Zealand European, 9 are female, 5 are male, with a BMI range between 34 and 71, with an average of 46. 9 have type 2 diabetes, and 5 have pre-diabetes. But this is when we looked at all the comorbidities. And I think it was quite shocking when we actually wrote them all down. We've got mental health issues, hypertension, chronic kidney disease, amenorrhea, severe obstructive sleep apnea, autism, fatty liver, recurrent skin sepsis, polycystic ovary syndromes, atopic eczema, sleep disorders, acne, and painful neuropathy. And this is with young people between the age of 15 and 18. They shouldn't have these problems. So let's have a case study. Let's have a look and see what's going on with these young people. So this is a first case study is our 15-year-old who has a strong family history of diabetes. Her father passed away a few years ago with renal disease and diabetes. Mother had type 2 diabetes and retinopathy. She was admitted to hospital with RSV a few weeks ago and was diagnosed with diabetes. She didn't go to have her bloods done for antibodies. She was given a prescription, but it wasn't picked up. She was then seen by her GP because she had very painful feet and couldn't walk and was given antibiotics. We've now managed to get some bloods from her, which is really great. So she's got an HbA1c of 109. We haven't got the antibodies back yet. But here we're looking really at health literacy. So how do we get the information across so that we can support this young person with her journey that she's going through? If we look at our second case study, this is a young lady that started with us originally at the beginning of the project. As you can see, her HbA1c is 50, not bad, but she was on Lantus 28 units BD, metformin 1 gram BD, tilazepam 5 milligrams. She lost 15.6 kg, which is awesome, and we're really pleased with her. And she came off all her medication. Her HbA1c came down to 44. She started putting some weight on now, but her HbA1c is still at that low level, and we're there to support and help her along the journey. So really, to conclude, this is a tough task to ask from anyone. It's not an easy thing to do, to go on Optifast, to be fasting, to change their diet, but we're really encouraged by the work that these young people are doing. We've had to take in consideration culture and religious issues. You know, what's happening with different flavors of shakes with coffee. Some religion you can't have coffee, but things that we hadn't thought about beforehand. But the thing we've found is that we really need to be very flexible. We couldn't run clinics the same way as we used to run them. You know, the young people might turn up an hour early, they might turn up 2 hours late. They can't come on Monday because they've got a family issue, so can they come on Thursday? So we've really had to change our views of how you run clinics. And consequently, it takes an awful lot of work and a lot of effort. Very high needs group with health needs, but they have major health gains, and that's what we've been seeing is some major health gains here. Family support is vital. We're finding that you've got to have the family involved, otherwise it's really hard for the young people to get to clinic, to carry on with eating healthy at home. And more individual input is needed, more than we planned. You know, if we had one group of 20, we would see them every week, it would all be over and finished by now. That hasn't happened. We've got 4 different groups, we've got a 5th about to start, and having to be a lot more flexible with the way it's working. But it's working well with good mixed team support, so lots of different people are here supporting. So that's all I've got to say tonight, and next we're going to be listening to Trish, and she's going to talk a bit about the young people that we've been working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. That was fantastic. I might ask Salah to introduce our last speaker, if she has got internet. Yeah, looks good.
I hopefully do. Kia ora, introducing our last speaker as part of the presentation. So we welcome Patricia Harry, born in New Zealand, but of the beautiful islands of both Niue and Tonga. Trish has worked for Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa for nearly 30 years with experience in different fields. Has been the data manager for the DCSS audit, community health promoter, lay educator and research assistant. Trish is a mother of 2 beautiful children with partner Brett, and is passionate about her line of work and and loves working in the community and helping our people. So kia ora, welcome Patricia.
Journeys. Whakalofalahi to everybody, good evening. My name is Trish Harry and I'm from the Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa. This evening my presentation will be about the fast track teen journeys. So let's meet our beautiful teens. They have type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes. The age criteria we look at is 15 to 18 years of age, variety of medications and other health issues, and also overweight. Recruited so far, we have recruited 14 to date. 10 have completed their 3 months VLCD, very low calorie diet using Optifast products. 2 have 4 weeks left. 1 is soon to start, recruited recently, and 1 did not complete the VLCD. This slide shows the VLCD levels. So if you look at this chart here, it just shows the 4 levels that we go through. The first one is the intensive level. So the teenagers go on an 8-week intensive level where it's 3 meal replacements, 2 to 4 cups of low starch vegetables, teaspoon of oil and water as well. Active level 2, where it shows on the yellow area, it goes down to 2 meal replacements and then a meal is brought into it with still the vegetables, the low starchy vegetables and water as well. And you're including your dairy and your fruit. Active level 2, it shows in that green area. It goes down to 1 meal replacement, your shake, and then another meal is brought back into it. And then finally, it's maintenance level, where they're learning to maintain that weight loss and on a good journey. The next slide shows motivational interviewing. So we have fortnightly catch-ups with the teens and whānau and family. So this is a good time where they also collect their shakes, and we give them a 2-week supply. They have weigh-ins, recipes are handed out, one-on-one meetings with our nutritionist, as well as our diabetes nurse specialist. And it's a good time just to chat with the family and the teen, what's happening in the last 2 weeks, how's things at school and at home, like that. And education is very important. So we each have a set time on what we educate them on, from label reading, from portion sizes, serving sizes, like that. Communication is really important, communicating with the teens as well as the family. So we use social media like Facebook. So we've set up 4 Facebook pages. And also they can contact me through Messenger. And this is a good way, using the Facebook, where I can put up daily notices, appointments, what's happening, challenges, footstep challenges, any recipes, handful tips they can use for their journey. And of course, the mobile phone, phoning and texting. Life. This next slide shows what's happening in their life, what challenges are ahead or barriers. As you can see, it's very busy. It's got lots of things that are happening at the moment. They're all still in school, so they're focusing on the NCEA level. Some teens don't have mobiles, or some don't have Facebook, so it's like working throughout the two, contacting the family, and also social media. Like most don't have Facebook. So they use their parents' Facebook to log onto the pages. Working around family for appointment times, just lots and lots of things happening. And also a big thing at home, large family, no special food, you eat what's there, what mum and dad cooks. Creating challenges to help with motivation. This is a real awesome one we've done, which is our footstep challenge. We completed one, we're still on our second one yet to finish, soon to finish. Awesome prizes to be won, and it gives them something where they can do with family, out and about. Walking is a good thing we encourage, and there's some good prizes, as you can see on this poster here. Our first challenge, there's a mini home Google system they won, and second prize was a K-Melt voucher. And this helps, so we do provide incentives. As you can see, when they do pick up the first lot of shakes, we give them a blender, and this helps with blending their shakes, as well as maybe making soups for the family as well. We do provide them with a hand shaker as well to mix their shakes up. Another teaching tool we've given them is a weighing scale. We've taught them on this. Well, Diana has, our nutritionist, has taught them how to weigh things like their meats or their protein. Another good thing we do offer the parents is it does help a $20 petrol voucher, getting their teenagers from A to B into the appointments. Another good incentive we've given them is the smartwatch, and this helps with their footstep challenge. And that records their steps, and they send this to me every evening through Messenger, and also bonus points as well. And that helps where they can get extra points to help them along with their footsteps. And another product that we're giving them when they first start is the noodles, as you can see, and that's a product called Slendia, and that's a low carb noodle, and there's also fettuccine and rice. Trying to eat a good range of foods. Sometimes it's not easy to get a good variety of fruits and vegetables due to cost, especially in South Auckland. Local veggie shops in Aotearoa, which aren't many, or what they do have isn't always the best quality or quite pricey. Sometimes parents will either choose what's easier and cheapest and convenient for them and family. We do find it really useful and helpful to educate whole family on variety of foods, what's in season, food groups and portion sizes. Trying to eat good can be costly. So I've just done this slide here showing a local veggie shop in Aotearoa. The common cauliflower and cabbage is around about, if you look at it, it's usually $1. After school, kids come home, they're quite hungry, and they don't always have that vegetable there, carrots or something healthy they can have. They go for the 4 pieces of white bread. And most families go for cheaper options and no nutritional value, and they get more for their money. And if you look at the common blue milk, so usually it's around most local shops about 2 for $5. Vegetables in season, is it pricey? I've just done a few pictures here on some common vegetables. Your tomatoes, I think at the moment are probably $15 a kilo. You're looking at capsicum, $3 for 1, even courgettes, zucchinis. We recently done a cooking demo for the young ones, and we used zucchini noodles, like a bolognese, and they were quite pricey at that time. I think I bought about 7, and it would have been $15 or more just for 7. So do shop around. It's good to buy vegetables in season. Shop around at local fruit and veggies stores to get good deal. And if you look at your frozen veggies, they're just as good. And if you look at that price, it's quite, I would buy that. And if you look at your diced tin of tomatoes, that's 80 cents. So that's quite handy as well. Quotes from our beautiful teens. I will change my way of thinking, and I'll change my mindset. I fell off the wagon this week, but I'll get back on it. Rough week, family issues. I can do this. I have more knowledge now. And Big Brother's helping a lot with encouragement. I'd like to thank everybody for your time, and whakaurelahi. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Trish. That was fantastic. I just really want to pay tribute to Trish for the work that she's done. She's really been the glue that's held this project together through anyone conducting a research project in a research environment, in a COVID environment, will understand the difficulties, and Trish is really the person that's made it all work. This is our question time. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but we've got time for 1 or 2 questions. I might just start, if I may. I just wanted to ask Trish a question. So Trish, aside from everything else that she has done, she served as the study guinea pig. So Trish kindly volunteered to try out the OptiFast very low calorie diet program, so we could understand the problems that our teens were likely to experience. You say that every good doctor should try out a treatment before he inflicts it on his patients, but unfortunately that doesn't always happen. Trish, could you comment on that, please?
Yes. You mean like my journey, John?
Yes. Yes.
So I was offered to take part in this journey. It's very fast. I didn't think it would be hard. It still is hard, but it was an awesome journey and opportunity, and also it was awesome for our young ones to do it as well. Life is a journey, and we do take different pathways, and you never know what's on the other side, so it's good to venture out. I did it for 3 months, and I learned a lot about myself, and I had great support from whānau as well as work whānau, and I learned a lot as well, self-control, and just trying to rethink my life. What's my why, basically. And I have 2 young ones, so I try to do it for them. And as one of my quotes from one of the young teens, I did say, you fall off the wagon. I fell off a lot of times after it, but I get back on, and life is a journey. And yeah, I'm still learning. I'm still on that journey.
Fantastic, Trish. Salah, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask of Kate or Trish?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll hand a question over to Kate. So, Kate, you spoke about one of the patients not being able to tolerate OptiFast with symptoms suggestive of lactose intolerance. Any thoughts on how, patients or those considering this option could deal with something like that?
Well, thank you for that question. it's very difficult because you can't always manage the Optifast, and I think that's an important thing. So we did try a different brand and a different type to see if that would help, but it didn't quite suit the patient. We were actually looking at trying out a new option, which is an injection called Saxenda. We're putting in for research ethics at the moment, and it may be that it's a different option, and we must thank Novo Nordisk for their support with this. And it's kind of, let's have a go and see. This young man is, I think he was 220 kg in weight. We can't just leave him. We need to support him. So it's kind of looking and seeing, can we offer something else? Can we help? So yes, there are different options, and let's have a look and see what we can do to help these young people.
Thanks, Kate. We do have a question from our audience. So Anna, the question was Optifast, which I believe costs $160 a month, and it's not subsidized by Pharmac, of course. Is there any discount for patients with diabetes? And I suppose that means beyond shopping around various pharmacy outlets and chemist warehouse and so on. So Kate, can you answer that question?
Yeah, I can try and answer it. There is no support for it in New Zealand. During this study, we are supporting these young people because it is costly. So we provide them with the Optifast throughout the study so that we can try and help them. Parents are equally saying, look, I want to have a go as well because I want to help my son or daughter. And what we do is we say, look, this place might be the cheapest place, or this is the cheapest place we found. So we'll try and direct people in a way to go and have a look and see where they can get it the cheapest. You know, maybe it's something that does need to be looked at. You know, we could fund it because we know it works. You know, we know that if you get the weight off in this early stages of diabetes, that we can actually do something about the blood sugars. So it is something that needs to be looked at. And hopefully this research is part of that. Thank you.
I'd like to pick up on another point that Trish made, that healthy eating actually is very expensive. And Brandon also alluded to this earlier. Food costs are a major cost for the family. Do you think in running a program like this, Trish and Kate, you can both answer this, we should really be looking at financial support for the family to enable the family to engage in the program? Because we are talking about a family dynamic here, aren't we?
Trish,
You go, Kate.
yeah, you want me to go? Okay. Well, there we are. We're both on here. It is something we're looking at because I think, as Trish alluded earlier, was, you know, things like courgettes are very expensive at the moment. So one of the things we've been looking at is can we give vouchers to Pack and Save or Countdown? We're also trying some new incentives. So Trish has started today is we're going to do a food challenge during the next 4 weeks. We're in lockdown. Let's see, can we get the family to cook at home? Trish, do you want to mention that family that you talked about this morning?
Yes, we have one of our teens, and it's a family of 5. So it's 2 young ones, mum and dad, and our teenager. We recently had a Zoom session with the teen and mum expressed that she needed a little bit help with family. Basically, dad eats quite high carbs and protein, so she's finding that she has to cook 3 meals, one for her husband, one for her teenager who's on Optifast, and one for her 2 little young ones. The young ones don't like vegetables, so they're having nuggets, that kind of fast processed kind of food, something you can grab from the freezer. They won't eat veggies, and mum has to do a separate meal for her daughter, and then the father gets protein and potato or taro. So she's just wanting ways how she can help cooking one meal, budget friendly, and easy to make as well. So we're trying to help, and that's why we created our next challenge, where I've just posted today, where they can come up with a recipe of the week, and also they can cook it with their family and show selfies or a video. So that's our next challenge.
Excellent. So I'd like to thank all the contributors to that section, and we should move on to the final presentation, which is a patient panel. And we've got 3 panelists, I believe. So I might ask my colleague Salah to introduce the first panelist, which is Graham King.
Kia ora, yes, I'd love to welcome Graham King. He is of Ngāti Tai Iwi, or Whakapapa, and his hapu is Ngāti Kohua. His little blurb about himself says most of Graham's working life he has worked as for the New Zealand Police as a sworn officer for 15 years and as a non-sworn employee for 13. He's worked in management roles in Scotland for 2 years, a private investigator for 12 years, and in commercial finance. Married with 2 adult children and 5 mokopuna, Graham was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 1990 while living and working in Scotland. Graham has been involved with some of the medication trials and currently sits on the Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa board. Welcome, Graham.
Kia ora tātou, ko rangitoto tōku maunga, ko wairo tōku awa, ko waitumata tōku moana, ko Ngāti Tai tōku iwi, ko Ngāti Kohua tōku hapu. No mataitai ahau, ko Graham King ahau, tēnā koutou katoa. My story begins with being brought up in the South Auckland city of Papakura. Most of my working life has been with the New Zealand Police as a sworn officer for 15.5 years to the rank of Detective Sergeant, and as a police employee for the past 13.5 years preparing prosecution files for jury trials in South Auckland. And currently I'm working in the family harm team at Auckland Central. In between these times, I was working in Scotland for 2 years and then as a private investigator and as a commercial finance lender. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes while living in Scotland in 1990, and as time went on, so did the level of my reliance on diabetic medication. They got to the stage where I was sent to see Dr. John Baker some 5 or 6 years ago, and was invited to be part of a drug trial and eventually start using the new wonder drug, empagliflozin. Now, my Māori grandmother died at age 69 with complications from suffering from type 2 diabetes. My father was a type 2 diabetic who did not survive on dialysis and had a kidney transplant and died at age 72 from complications with the transplant. I decided to continue with being involved in diabetes research, and as a result was invited to sit on the board of Diabetes Foundation Aotearoa, and I guess here I am. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Thank you, Graham. I think we should now move on, introduce all 3 panelists and then have some questions at the end. So the second panelist is Ruby McGill. Very grateful that Ruby could join us all the way from Wellington. I'll ask Salah to introduce Ruby, please.
Kia ora, yes, Ruby Gill of Te Aotearoa descent. She's a blogger, a business owner, a mum, and a type 1 diabetes warrior who is determined to live a long, full and healthy life while sharing her experiences to help others thrive with type 1 diabetes. Ruby was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 14 years old and has become a staunch advocate for people living with diabetes being able to access the tools, medicines and support needed to live well, believing strongly that it shouldn't be a luxury to live well with diabetes in New Zealand. Welcome, Ruby.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko parapara te maunga, ko te Aotearoa te iwi, ko orongo mai te marae, no te awa kairangi ki uta ahau, ko Ruby toku ingoa. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 14 years old, through my 5th form or year 11 at college. Fast forward 22 years and here I am. It certainly hasn't been easy, and just when we think we have a grasp of type 1 diabetes, it pulls the mat from under us and we come crashing down. I say we because anyone who has loved a type 1 diabetic knows that this disease affects not just the person diagnosed, but everyone around them. Type 1 diabetes is one of the most common chronic diseases of childhood, with close to 25,000 children and adults living with type 1 diabetes in New Zealand, requiring multiple daily insulin injections to survive. The first few years after my diagnosis are a blur. I don't think I truly understood the enormity of this disease and the complications I could face if I didn't take care of myself. Luckily, I managed to make it through my teenage years relatively unscathed, with only a few minor diabetes mishaps. From the outside, I was like any other teenager. However, during this time, I was admitted to hospital a number of times due to extreme hypos or ketones. One visit, I was even admitted to the intensive care unit. I can only imagine what this time was like for my parents, and I certainly wasn't a rebellious kid, but like all teenagers, I'd try things and push the boundaries to work out who I was. Since then, I've travelled the world, worked in various different roles, become a mum, and continue to do all I can to ensure I am more than my diabetes diagnosis. There are no days off with type 1 diabetes. It is relentless. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I have to test, inject, count carbs, and correct. If I get it wrong, the consequences could be fatal. Rightly or wrongly, when I'm asked how my diabetes is going, I normally say fine. But if I'm truly honest, it's hard and often exhausting. Despite doing everything my diabetes team tell me to do, my blood sugars often have a mind of their own. Until recently, I thought out-of-range blood sugars made me a bad diabetic. Only after joining the online type 1 community did I discover I'm not a bad diabetic. I am simply a diabetic doing the best I can with the information and the tools I have available. For people living with type 1 diabetes in New Zealand, there is currently only one funded blood glucose meter available. Like many long-term conditions, there is not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to living well with diabetes. Yet, in 2012, Pharmac made the decision to enter a single supplier agreement for blood glucose monitors and test strips. Once the supplier was selected, clinical testing was undertaken, but no usability or consumer testing was completed. This is so disappointing, especially because every person living with type 1 diabetes is reliant on this device and the results to calculate insulin, correct blood sugars, and live well. And while Pharmac proudly reported a $10 million saving per year over the contract, members of the diabetes community have been navigating inaccuracies, errors, and frustrations that the device doesn't work below 10 degrees. I recently learned that people living with type 1 diabetes are 50% more likely to suffer from depression. This comes as no surprise when every blood sugar level or blood sugar result can feel like a reminder that you're either on track or failing. And in my opinion, to truly master diabetes, you must be resilient and mentally tough. And with that in mind, it's bizarre that this is not discussed during diagnosis or regular hospital appointments. How come newly diagnosed diabetics aren't armed with strategies to build strong mental health? Like so many things, it appears there is an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff mentality, rather than being proactive and providing tools and resources up front. Landmark trials have confirmed that intensive diabetes management reduces rates of long-term complications. Intensive diabetes management is achieved through close blood glucose monitoring and either multiple insulin injections throughout the day or by using an insulin pump. So insulin pumps have been publicly funded via special criteria in New Zealand since 2012, but the uptake varies between DHB of residence, ethnicity, degree of deprivation, age, and gender, further increasing health inequities in Aotearoa. Insulin pumps are an important tool in diabetes management, yet the current Pharmac funding criteria currently disadvantages those with less healthy control, and that is likely contributing to disparity and unequal access. This is frustrating because people struggling with the burden of diabetes or glycemic control potentially have the most to gain from this diabetes technology. A recent New Zealand study discovered that males are less likely to be using a pump, so are Māori, Pacific, and Asian patients, and those in more deprived areas. Around the world, type 1 diabetics are using continuous glucose monitors to help manage their diabetes, a CGM. Unfortunately, for Kiwis, the 3 CGMs available in New Zealand are not funded, which means for the majority of us, we will never experience the benefit of this life-saving technology. A CGM, continuous glucose monitor, is able to predict what will happen and alert the person with diabetes, their parents, their teachers, their partners of life-threatening out-of-range blood sugars. So this provides peace of mind, confidence, and improved control to people living with type 1 and their entire whānau, reducing the burden of type 1 diabetes on their health and well-being, while also reducing the need for regular hospitalizations. I'd like to share with you a mother's perspective who has been self-funding a CGM for her child. So having a CGM for our 7-year-old son has changed his life and ours. He is having far less painful prick tests, he's less upset, and we have been able to manage his levels far easier with the increased information. It literally saved his life one night when it identified a massive drop, which we could treat before he fell into a deeper sleep. He's able to focus more on his education without the huge interruption of having to do finger pricks all the time. We're all finally getting more sleep. I can't put into words how wonderful it is to have access to this life-saving and life-changing device. It shouldn't be a luxury to live well with diabetes in New Zealand. We know that living with diabetes can be tough. It certainly takes a team of friends, family, and experts to master diabetes. And in my opinion, the more support available, the better. And the sooner we all have access to life-changing, life-saving diabetes technology, the sooner we can thrive with diabetes, reducing the pressure on our health and well-being, the health system, and our families. Kia ora.
Thank you, Ruby, for that truly passionate presentation. We really feel your pain there. I'd like to ask Salah to introduce our final panel member, Robert Clark, who's a good friend of mine. Salah.
Kia ora, yes, and Robert and I are on Zooms nearly every day in response to COVID as part of the South Auckland community. So tēnā koe, Rob. Robert is of Ngāti Tipa descent, I believe, but sits as the Mana Whenua i Tamaki Makaurau Trust Board Chair and is part of the county's Manukau Health Treaty Partnership. Robert specialises in governance and kaitiaki for iwi, hapu and marae. He has type 2 diabetes and has participated in some of the recent trials. So tēnā koe, Robert.
Tēnā tātou. Nā mihi ki a koutou. He honore he korore ki te atua. Whakahonore te ki te kigi Māori atu hei te apotatau te peropero te tū. Te whare o te ariki he rire hau e pai mārire. A ko au koe ko Robert Clark tōku ingoa. Ko waikato te awa, tainui te waka. O Ngāti Tipa te hapu ko te kotaitanga tōku marae. Ko te whānau Clark. No reira, te tēmā. So as my introduction was put out, I'm the current chair for Mana Whenua i Tamaki Makaurau, who is the treaty partner for the Counties Manukau DHB. And so before I give relevance to my kōrero there, he me ana John, for it's not by chance that we came across one another, but it's by my unwellness and your greatness to look for methods of care and well-doing for not only for me, but what I do is always for my people and for all people. It's part of my role as Mana Whenua i Tamaki. So I'll go back to a quick little history with me having type 2 diabetes. Quick story. I assisted my wife to a doctor's appointment one day. We go in. She's prone to be on the, 7. So she's going to be at risk diabetic. I get tested at the same time while I'm there with her. I'm only around 4. We go to work. We end up picking up a job together as doing catering. for wānanga, long days, long jobs. So I get on to the mother's drinks, the energy drinks, to help me get through the day and everything. So 3.5 months later, we go into the doctors for her checkup. So I decide to get checked and get pricked. Hello, I'm reading bloods of 14 to 15. This is in a matter of 3 months and whatnot. And I then become, I can't be. I challenge it all in the discussion. But anyway, I have it. And so what am I going to do about it? I talked to what I found recently, when I talked to the doctor to try and find some peace of mind, because the first lot of doctors said to me, well, none of them at that time could say to me, you're too big. I've actually become big while I've had diabetes. Before having diabetics, I was a fit and well-toned, well-trimmed, well-working young man. Well, that's what I think of myself anyway at that time. Somebody else might say not. But at that time, that's what I was. I was fully active, fully thing at that time when I got it. But when I've got there, I spoke to my doctor. How? You know, just the mothers. I've only been 3.5. Can I reverse it? Can I? And it was very much like at that time, no. You're going to have to manage it by doing these things. And I says, well, how did I get it? One explanation that I want to check out there that was given to me is that, and I believe some of it to be true today, was my DNA. My mother died from diabetic and heart-related diseases. My grandfather died of the same things and all of a younger age. The doctor at the time said to me, because of the close links, the same diet as my mother, the same habits as my mother, I was always going to get diabetes. It was just a matter of when. My mother got diabetes in her closer to her 50s, late 40s, closer to her 50s. I had it in my 30s, early 30s. So what's come available and apparent to me and our family is that if I change one thing different from my mother and my grandfather, I may not have got diabetes until I was in the 40s or 50s. But I've had exactly the same diet, the same habits, and the same lifestyle, hard work, and so I picked up the same illnesses and everything. So that's my journey of when I've had it. And I've real quickly been on the most medicine you can have, along with the insulin and whatnot, for quite a while, and I manage it. I've managed it, but I've gotten bigger over the years. I've gotten heavier over the years. I haven't gotten lighter. Going through this balance of my body telling me I need to eat more. Well, I'm losing this and I need to eat more. Medicine is playing around with me. But what I want to talk about is that how, a second part, what I want to talk about is how we perceive diabetes to be. There's a word in there called hukamata. And I was telling John about it. That's death by sugar. That's what it means. Death by sugar. It's cruel if you want to make a statement that it's the right thing to use. But it isn't fully correct because it's not just death by sugar. There are many other contributing factors to it other than sugar. There's all this lifestyle and everything. So just to call it death by sugar, cutting sugars isn't just going to be the thing to solve it all. And so when I look at death by sugar and everything else, and what can I do? Because I want to change. I don't want my kids. They can't have the same habits as me. They can't be eating the same food. I don't care how fit and how much they love sport, because I was. But then I still ate a certain diet on the table. I still had, I finished alcohol early, but I had to really put it in my system. I had to really put it in my system early enough to make the damage. I don't want that for my kids and everything else. How do I change it? When everything that is being produced for our people and our family at this time feeds against it. I can only afford to give them and feed them and bring my family up with the stuff that are no good. They contribute to diabetes. They take away all our food that we naturally used to live off, resource that was any good to us, and we've got to go shopping and buy it. We can't afford it. Me and my big family and everything and how we were, couldn't afford it. And so affordability, that's a problem for me and my family. But we're learning, we're getting through this stuff. Not only that, it's the perception. If you want evidence of how bad it hits my people and everything, you come to the marae. In the morning, if one of us have left the needle behind, there's about 5 other people that will say, 5 or 6 that will say, oh, I've got a spare one over here, cuz. Or you left your insulin behind, I got some over here, cuz. And you also go to our cemetery and you see over half of our cemetery are full of either diabetics or heart-related diseases that have passed away. So that brings me to where I am now. I could keep on going down that track and trying to battle it and do all of these other operation things that shortcut and stuff, but I've also wagered that suited some of our people, the bariatric surgeries, and for some of our whānau, it hasn't. They've struggled, they've come out worse off, their bodies have taken injections to it, so it's not a thing for me. What is for me is the management of my medicine. So I'm taking faith in what the specialists are giving me, and I'm sticking to them. That's the one thing I'm consistently doing, like all the other habits of eating all the wrong food. I can consistently, because of the bad habit trait that I have, stick to a habit. And one of them is taking my medicine morning and night. Morning and night, and sticking to them. That's what I'm doing. Now, I've always known in my role at Mana Whenua, I hear about trials and clinical trials and doing something extra. And my people, they call that guinea pigs. And you will see hardly any of my Māori people ever go and put themselves up to be a test, to be a guinea pig for something. That's how they look at it. When I look over data sheets and everything, trials can only work out the data and what they do have, or what they do have. So me and my wife, we made a conscious thing as leaders of our people to put ourselves up to be tested. So we joined the trials and we welcomed and tried everybody else. And I've said to all, I've challenged all my people and everything in our families that come and do trials. How are they ever going to design something that'll make a difference for us if they don't have our data, if they don't have our blood test, if they don't have us there at a time like this? So I've encouraged all my family to come forward and take on trials and everything. And I didn't leave my story there, but I want to mihi once again to John and the team, because I've been able to say to my family and everything, the care you give, you get given. The extra treatment you get given, you're not going to get it anywhere else out there in the normal service. And the outcome, if we can put ourselves up to be tested for those who come after us, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't one of us make a stand to come forward and everything? So nā mihi kia koutou e koutou. There's much, much more. I hear all the anguish of our last speaker, he mihi aroha. But, you know, I also want to remind us at a time that we're able to sit here and talk about this. Imagine the distress that are on our people at the moment in COVID. We suffer now. When we're out of COVID, we suffer together. But today and tonight, we suffer in isolation. So I hear about all the mental well-being of our whānau and everything. I hear their kōrero and support it. So nā mihi kia koutou. Thank you, John. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Robert, for that really candid story. It's really quite touching. I'd like to ask our 3 panelists if they could just stay on the line. The time is up for our session, but we'd just like to ask a few questions, if that's okay with you, the 3 of you. So if that's okay, I might start. I'll start by asking Graham. Are you still there, Graham?
Still here, John.
Graham, you've participated in a number of clinical trials of experimental new medicines. This is just following on from the theme that Robert has talked about, and I believe you self-funded one of the new drugs. Can you comment on your experiences of being in a clinical trial? What would you like to say to Pharmac about early funding of new medicines that are shown to be effective?
I guess the big thing is, if listening to what Robert had to say about, and listening to the other person taking questions, is that we seem to have a major problem with Pharmac, who are not looking at the people and looking at the money. They're not looking at the demographics of the people who are suffering. And obviously being bred in South Auckland, we find that my people in particular and Pacifica are really disadvantaged, mainly because they can't afford to go to the doctor. They can't afford to do lots and lots of things in relation to their medical well-being. You go to a doctor, he's timing you a bit like a lawyer, ticking off the minutes, and you'll be lucky if you get 10 to 15 minutes. And as a diabetic, growing up in that situation, I found it quite difficult until I came to the testing that's run by you and your colleagues, which I found fantastic because I'm one of the lucky ones. I get to see a diabetic expert, very, very frequently, who does his best to keep me on the straight and narrow. But I guess once I went on that dapagliflozin trial and then it became available, I was lucky because I earn a reasonable salary that I could afford to pay $100 a month just to bring my diabetes back into being able to manage it. And the reason I did that was because when I stopped the trial, my diabetic, if you looked at all the testing, all went up as opposed to what they were prior to that. So once I went back on the medication, obviously things changed, and I think you did some great work around getting Pharmac to help those of us who needed it. And I think that sometimes we just tend to forget about the little people, and it's all about the money. And I agree with Ruby that Pharmac just don't do enough for our people.
Thank you, Graham. I've got a question for Ruby, which I might press on with, and then I'll leave Salah to ask a question of Robert. Ruby, you've addressed the Health Select Committee. It's the Health Select Committee of Parliament in support of the Diabetes New Zealand petition about funding of new diabetes drugs. And I heard you speak there and I was hugely impressed. You've also spoken to the Pharmac Review Committee. I heard you speak there and I was hugely impressed. And so here you are today. What messages do you want to deliver to Pharmac concerning the needs of patients for type 1 diabetes? So this is a different condition from type 2 diabetes, but nevertheless, the needs are very great. Can you answer that question, Ruby?
I think it's that when it comes to the type 1 diabetes, it's 24/7, and as I mentioned earlier, this affects the person with diabetes and all of their whānau. So you can imagine being a parent of a young 10-month-old who cannot communicate, having to navigate the ups and the downs, knowing that if they go low or high with massive consequences, and that there's this technology that is available. It is funded throughout the world, but not here. And this isn't a little luxury item. This allows us to ensure that people living with type 1 and their entire whānau, so their parents, but also their siblings, that we just have a chance to not only navigate these health complications, short-term, long-term, but just to live normal lives. One of the biggest things we're noticing at the moment with the CGM technology, with an insulin pump, is that families are able to say, and especially parents are able to say, we can sleep at night. So rather than up multiple times worrying that their child might not wake in the morning, they've got the peace of mind. This technology will alarm, obviously they sleep well, and then they're able to get up in the morning and function. So off to jobs, off to school, off to be part of the community. And it's frustrating that we continue to fight and share these messages, and they're just not being heard, and people are exhausted, and it's hard.
Thank you, Ruby. So Laura, I'm going to be greedy and I'm going to ask Robert a question myself. I'm sorry about this. Robert, we've heard about the creation of an independent Maori health authority as part of the reform of Aotearoa New Zealand health system. And most people agree that that's a good idea. The government, and I looked at their material online, they talk about the health authority improving services and achieving equitable health outcomes for Maori. Do you have any thoughts yourself how that might actually work?
So I'm a big advocate for whānau. I'm a big advocate for whānau. And what I heard Ruby talking about, having the ability to navigate, to do the other thing, we call it mana mo te hake. Once you've been given the support and the tools to be able to navigate, we all know what we need to do, and we all know what we do wrong. But if we've been given the opportunity of what can help us do the right thing and do the right way, then we shall have a better outcome. And let us be the destined of that. Then we can't blame anybody. We can't talk about the system has failed us, everything else, because we've had a say and we've got our own way and we've got the right to determine the outcome of our health passage. So for me and my role, Don, I'll take my eye and I've only got, as Māori, I'm already spoken for in the Māori Health Authority space. As mana whenua, as the treaty partner, my lens is also fully on the rest of the New Zealand Health Authority space. Because just to be put into the one basket, we as Māori already know we'll be searching for mana mo te hake. That's the difference there. To be destinies of our own health pathways. So when whānau say this is what we need, this is what should happen. If you give us this and that, we shouldn't go down this road anymore. So that's kind of how I put it, perceive it in my basic terms there. But what may not change, if I don't keep my eye on the New Zealand Health Authority system, then what things may not change for when we're in the hospitals, what the services look like, the ability to deal with whāmek and whatnot. I think there's still more power with New Zealand Authority. So I think a Māori Health Authority is there to build our own mana mo te hake. That's how I build it. The great thing about having it, we fought for it. I've fought for it. My predecessors for my role put their toko in the ground over and over for years and walked out of many meetings and says, you don't know. Put it this way, John, those who have created the problem can't fix it. People who created the problem are those who fed us all the rubbish, fed us all the poison, put it in front of us, swapped us all this stuff. So they can't fix it. The people who can fix it are ourselves by determining what it is we take and which pathway we go down. So hopefully I'm giving you some kind of clarity in that one.
That's a very encouraging answer. Robert, I just commend you to keep up that very good work. I think our time is up. I'd like to thank all our presenters, and I might ask Salah as a final right, Salah, to summarize the meeting and all the good words that have been said tonight.
Absolutely, kia ora tātou. So again, I want to acknowledge my ability to be here and to co-chair tonight's event. Obviously, it would have been much nicer to be face-to-face, but COVID had other plans. Hei aha, here we are still able to share some of the real insights into what is needed in the reforms and changes that we require to support all whānau living with whether it be type 1 or type 2 diabetes or those that are pre-diabetic. So my well wishes go to all of those that are living with those conditions right now. And I think there's a lot of structural change that needs to occur in regards to what currently isn't working well for those with diabetes and what we can do to prevent those without diabetes currently from ever having to venture down that path, obviously in the type 2 space. So I'll close with a short mihi statement, and then I think we're going to pass over to our kaikarakia. So nō reira, e aku rangatira noho ora mai e roto i ngā atawhai a te wāhi ngaro, Māori tū, Māori ohoho, Māori ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Yeah.
Thank you, Salah. That was extremely nice. I wonder, Raymond, if you could we need to acknowledge our sponsors, and I really, without our sponsors' support, none of this work could have been possible. And there is just a single slide which we'd like to show, Raymond.
John, just as you go in there, I can't help but my heart is racing, and looking at the moment is that I just needed to clear that about isolation. Our whānau was stuck with all the, they're unable to walk away from the cheap fizzy drinks that are in their fridge at the moment. Boredom and whatnot else, they're unable to walk away from food. They have it in the boredom to go and eat more and everything. So really, really, in closing and encouraging our stuff tonight, just the thought to create something that's going to suffice our people in the next lockdown if it happens, John, that's a challenge for you. Ngā mihi, haroa mai, haroa closely.
I'd like to pass it now to Pat, my colleague Pat, to close the meeting with thanks to everybody.
Kia ora tātou. We thank you once again for joining us tonight for our 2021 summit. It's been a really refreshing opportunity to hear your whakaaro in the community and also hear from those who have spent many, many years looking into ways that we can simply make life better for our whānau and our community. I'm privileged, I'm blessed, I'm honoured to close our summit for 2021 with a karakia whakamutunga. Kia ora. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ato whai o tō tātou ariki a hiu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake. Āmeni. Kia ora.
Ai marere. Ai.